Welcome to the September 8, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. We continue to operate in a virtual environment and will likely do so through the fall. I would like to ask for patience as we use this platform for our public meetings. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, presentations, and participants. If any participants have issues with technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. We have 5 items and 1 committee report on our agenda today. Some of these items have been discussed previously. I would ask the commission members to focus comments and questions on identified outstanding issues for each request. We may hear an abbreviated staff presentation for items that have previously appeared before us. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. I would also ask each commissioner to be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. 6 discussion items on the agenda today. I would ask everyone to be efficient with our time so we can discuss all the items. And first up is committee report. The commission has so just to introduce you, CJ, the text change committee met on August 18th to discuss the text change TC 620. The item was presented at the August 25th Planning Commission meeting, but was deferred to allow staff to place the meeting video online. I understand from staff that this has occurred. We are not anticipating a staff presentation, but we'll hear from CJ on that, and if there are any other outstanding questions from fellow commissioners.
Thanks, Commissioner Thomasula. On our 25th of August meeting, I reported TC 620 neighborhood transition requirement on senior housing. In a quick review, this text change amends the 10-part Raleigh UDO to apply appropriate exemptions to the neighborhood transition requirements and simplify and align congregate care and continuing care community requirements with state and federal regulations. Basically, the holdup last time was that we did not have a video online, and that has now been uploaded onto the city's website. So there was a holdup with as far as us not being comfortable voting on this case. And I think all of those changes had been made. So I think we're ready now to make a motion and to get this case out of the way. Commissioner Thomasula, I think that's all I have for TC 620.
Sorry, training wheels. So rewind. This was voted out of committee 5-0 in support with the few modifications explained in the text change, and but do want to offer the opportunity, if any. Normally, we would not have discussion here in Planning Commission and make a motion to move it on. But I did want to check with commissioners if there were other questions or discussion. Not being here, I wasn't sure if anyone was able to have conversations with anyone prior to the meeting or prior to the last meeting, and if there are any outstanding questions regarding this. Commissioner Hicks?
Yes, thank you. I had a few questions that the public had asked, and so I just wanted to get clarification on item section 4, number 2I, where type B1 transitional protective yards was removed for continuing care retirement community. If someone could just briefly explain why that's a cleanup and why that was struck. I think there was some questions from the public with concerns that there would be a 50-foot tall structure, you know, within 6 to 10 feet of a 1 or 2 story residential structure. If you could just clarify why that's a cleanup, that would be helpful. Thank you. And I don't know if that's for staff or for, I guess that's for staff or CJ.
This is Keegan McDonald. I'm happy to respond to the, I guess, the second part of that question related to a structure being located within, I think I saw that email, within 6 feet of a neighboring property line. I will say, I think there may have been something lost in translation potentially in explaining the text change. So for those buildings, let's call them medium intensity residential uses, the Zone A protective yard would still be required in this instance, and the minimum width of a Zone A protective yard is 10 feet, notwithstanding any additional setbacks from that property line. And so the 0 to the 6 foot may have been referring to the belief that they would only have to comply with the setback requirement in those instances. But in this case, if there is, again, an abutting residential district next to a mixed-use district, this change would eliminate zones B and C, which are use restricted and heightened form restrictions, but would still retain the Zone A protective yard, which again, even with a wall and fairly intensive landscaping, would still require a minimum 10-foot separation, because that's the minimum required width. As for removal of the protection or the protective yard within CCRCs, I believe, maybe David York could provide some additional insight into that. I do know it was just part of an explicit recommendation from the council, seeing it as a barrier to developing these types of communities. It didn't seem to align with similar types of residential development. It was seen as an additional barrier that didn't exist for other types of residential developments of this kind of intensity. Perhaps David could provide some additional insight, but that's my understanding.
The UDO, this would be the only residential use that would be required to observe Zone B and C. That those are for more intense uses, and retirement communities are in many instances far less intense than other, residential uses, given the elder care nature of the thing. So I think it was just an attempt to bring some equity in how a congregate care facility would have to buffer other residential property compared to an apartment or something to that effect. This was part of a citizen request, and I don't know whether Joe's on the phone or not, but he was, Joe Whitehouse was one of the proponents who brought this to the city council's attention. So I don't know if he wants to weigh in or not, or if you want to hear from him.
Thank-
Certainly, David. This is Joe Whitehouse, and yes, thank you very much. This was added actually back in when we went through TC 1117 a couple of years ago. This was a last-minute addition that was added in at the council table without any real discussion or thought about the effects of this. Prior to TC 1117. Any senior housing's never been required to have a larger transitional protective yard versus any other similar housing type of multifamily units. This was seen as a really penalized senior housing development. And, traditionally, if you look at senior housing across the city, you'll see that they make actually great neighbors and are less intrusive into the neighborhood. The only uses that require a type B1 transitional buffer yard today are heavy industrial, manufactured housing, public or institutional use. And I think all of those are way in excess of what a senior housing community would the impacts would be. So this is really to sort of put senior housing back on a level playing field with other housing types within the city of Raleigh. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for that. Commissioner Hicks, does that help add some clarity through your lens?
Yes, I think it does. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. And then with this motion, I'll also make a consistency statement with the comp plan on this motion.
Okay.
So I move to adopt and approve the proposed consistency statement dated September 8th, 2020, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval for the zoning amendment. Here's a consistency statement that I'll be making as far as the comp plan with regards to TC 620, neighborhood transition requirements and senior housing. After considering the policies and other materials included as part of the 2030 comp plan, the Planning Commission determines the proposed zoning text amendment is consistent with the 2030 comp plan and other adopted plans should be approved. The policy statements contained in the 2030 comp plan have been considered relevant. LU 5.4, density transitions, LU 5.6, buffering requirements, H 1.8, zoning for housing, H 2.5, removing housing barriers, H 4.1, Fair Housing Act enforcement. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because, number one, the text change would create responsible exemptions to the neighborhood transition requirements for low and moderate income residential uses. And number two, the text change would eliminate barriers to development of senior housing and better align the UDO with federal law.
Second. Seeing a motion and a second in approval, we can now take vote. So I'll ask Chinita for a roll call of members to record the individual votes.
Good morning. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks?
Aye.
Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Chair Tomasulo?
Aye.
Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. The motion passes 9-0. Moving on to the consent agenda. This is our first order of business, and the consent agenda is a list of requests that can be acted upon in motion. Instead of acting on each request individually, the Commission can approve the items with one motion and vote. There are 7 items on the consent agenda, and I would ask to add an 8th. I would ask that case CP 420 be added and deferred for discussion at a later date. All but one of these items appear to satisfy timing requirements for delivery of the request to the Planning Commission. Case Z 2419 would be referred to Committee of the Whole. And that is a new plan development. To be clear, the Commission is not voting on the final disposition of the applications and is simply deferring discussion to a future agenda. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. Commissioner Fox?
Motion to approve consent agenda.
Thank you. And a second, Commissioner Hicks?
Second.
Thank you. So Commissioner Fox has offered a motion to approve. Commissioner Hicks has seconded the motion. I will ask Janitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner Haver?
Aye.
Chair Tomasulo?
Aye.
Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, everyone. The motion passes successfully 9-0. Moving on, we'll begin the old business portion of the agenda. These are requests that have appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda. And in many cases, we haven't necessarily heard about these, but they were on the consent agenda for time purposes. And the first case that we're hearing today is Z1419. This is a request to rezone approximately 4 acres of land from industrial mixed use 3 stories to planned development. This request also contains a master plan. This request was placed on the consent agenda on June 30th and not discussed. Staff will provide an overview of the case. And I will just make note that this is a PD. We normally do move these to Committee of the Whole, but this applicant has been very patient and has been working through, I think, the last year or so. And so we do want to kind of, out of respect for their patience through the process over the last year, hear the case today and have a discussion at the table. Jason Harden will present on behalf of the city staff.
Excuse me, Matt.
Yes.
I need to recuse myself from this case. Our firm is working on this project.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. Mr. York, is there anything in particular that we have to do, or does that affirm?
You can just say without objection, he's recused from this matter, and then move on. Unless there's an objection, then you have to take a vote.
Okay. Without objection, Commissioner O'Haver, what's the proper terminology?
Recused.
So, does he recuse himself, or am I recusing him? Sorry.
He requested to be recused from the case.
Okay. Okay. Without objection, Commissioner O'Haver has requested to be recused from the case.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Seeing none, we can hear from Jason Harden to present on behalf of city staff.
Thanks, and good morning. A quick note also on the subject of the PD and the timing issue. So, of course, the committee hasn't met much since the spring. The first meeting back was last month. That was occupied by discussion of the Midtown area plan, which is still on that agenda. Probably a lot of discussion in September. So in order to bring this forward without requesting a delay before it was even discussed, this was the agenda that would allow that to happen. So the request, yeah, a little bit less than 4 acres. It does use neighborhood mixed use as a base zoning district with some additional modifications. Received a positive CAC vote. This was filed in 2019. Received a positive CAC vote in November. And the deadline for action is September, so that would leave this meeting or the following PC meeting without an extension. Next slide. So an aerial view, you see the site, it's currently a vacant entire block between Blunt and Person and Bragg and Branch streets. It is just south of the South Park neighborhood and South Park overlay district. It is near the old former Cargill site and potential bus rapid transit along South Wilmington. And along the rail line where you tend to see the industrial uses historically, and this block is right at the transition area where those industrial uses transition into residential uses further to the north and to the east. Next slide. So some views of the site again. It has, I'm sure, had many uses over its lifetime, most recently before it was demolished as a bus facility. Now it's a fully vacant block. Next slide. So these are just different slides. This is looking west into the site. That's looking east from Branch Street. And then finally southeast from South Blunt Street. So one thing I'll note about the proposed PD, it's actually fairly straightforward as far as plan developments go. There are a couple of points I'll talk about, 2 tracks, and I'm sure the applicant will as well. It splits the overall site up into tract A, which amounts to almost all of the block, and that is where it would be restricted to residential uses. And then tract B, outlined in yellow there in the southeast corner of the street, and that is where the commercial space would be permitted. Next slide. So a comparison of the existing versus proposed. So that existing industrial mixed use zoning, 3 stories. Essentially, this is an estimate, not a hard cap, but allows approximately the same number of residential units and residential density as what's proposed. So the PD would cap residential units at 100 and cap commercial space at 10,000 square feet. So it's actually less commercial space, whether that's retail or office, than is currently permitted. And the PD would not allow industrial uses as the current zoning does. Height is currently limited to 3 stories by the IX3 zoning. The proposed PD would, and it divides it into A and B. So in most of the area would allow 5 stories and 55 feet. In that tract B, the commercial space, 3 stories and 50 feet. I would note that it would only permit 4 occupied stories. The 5th floor would be limited to rooftop uses and rooftop access, such as a stairway. Setbacks, existing 3 feet, proposed specifies a build to of between 5 and 55 feet. Next slide. So these are the specific modifications, and these are from, again, that neighborhood mixed use base zoning district. So it eliminates any minimum area for an apartment building type. A little bit more significantly, it modifies the build to percentages. So for an apartment building, you would have a minimum on the primary street, minimum of 70% within the build to. This allows 55%, so a modest modification, 35 on the side and 20 on the side as proposed. It does not require the building be elevated off the ground floor. Current code would say 2 feet. Reduces transparency, so that would be windows or any other transparent elements, the requirement on those floors, and does allow, currently code restricts the amount of blank wall, so something in between something that breaks up that wall, a window. It eliminates that maximum blank wall distance. Next slide. So a few more additional modifications, and these the previous ones, I'm sorry, were relating to the apartment building type. These have to do with the general building type. Very minor adjustment to alley setbacks. A smaller adjustment for the blank wall for the general building type, which actually reduces, in that case, the maximum amount of blank wall. For a mixed-use building, in that tract B, the commercial space, that could either be a general building if it's all commercial, or it could be mixed use if there are some residential uses there. Same adjustment to the setback, a little adjustment to the ground story height requirement, and an adjustment to the ground story transparency from 50% to 33%. Again, that's windows or something else you can see through. So next slide. A few more provisions that are helpful to understanding the overall PD. So again, neighborhood mixed use as the base, and controlling the uses, so not industrial, but allowing most commercial uses, office, retail, restaurant. It does prohibit some additional uses that otherwise would be allowed in that district: vehicle fuel sales, vehicle sales and repair. It sets its parking standards based on downtown mixed use standards. So in this case, and that's actually been updated from your staff report, a text change was approved relatively recently that adjusted parking requirements in the downtown mixed use category. So it requires no spaces. It sets a maximum of 2 per unit. And then I mentioned previously that the top story would not be an occupied story. It would be limited to just rooftop deck access only. So future land use map is neighborhood mixed use. You can see that transition that you could also see from the aerial. So to the south and to the west, that legacy of industrial uses, more of a mixed use future land use map. To the north and to the east, residential, moderate density residential in this case. So the future land use map also contains height recommendations depending on context. This site is close to some residential areas. It's also close to high levels of transit. It falls into what that table for height guidance calls a general category, which says 4 stories. Given that this is limiting height to 4 occupied stories, and that the height limit of 55 feet is lower than what the code would allow for 4-story buildings, consistent with that height recommendation. And the use is consistent as well. Next slide. There's also some area planning guidance for this site and this area. It's a part of the South Park area plan. And it designates this area. Much of that plan is focused on either downtown transitions to the north or the residential area that makes up the bulk of it. This particular part was designated as a focal point and encourages denser residential uses or a mix of retail or office or similar uses. So consistent, again, with that planning guidance. The urban form map, hopefully you can see that clearly enough. So it shows the transit emphasis corridor that's following the potential bus rapid transit path on Wilmington Street. This is close to that and therefore designated as a core transit area, which calls for a higher level of walkability. So the provisions, it does include build-to requirements, and it does specify that parking could not go between the building and the street. It would have to be accessed by alleys. So that provides that higher level of walkability from the design of the building itself that's consistent with that urban form designation. And consistent with several comprehensive plan policies, reducing vehicle miles traveled through mixed use, limiting high impact commercial uses that would otherwise be allowed in that IX zoning district, consistent with that policy, consistent with policies that encourage more housing variety and more housing overall, consistent with the EP 1.1 greenhouse gas reduction. So more housing close to transit in a walkable area tends to produce fewer carbon emissions, consistent with that policy and consistent with the area plan policy as well. Next slide. Inconsistent with just one policy, and it's a portion of the urban design guidelines that have to do with creating a more lively frontage along the street. So those modifications that had to do with transparency tend to not be consistent with that policy, although it is consistent with some other urban design guidelines in that overall policy. So consistent with the future land use map designation and the relevant area plan policy, consistent with urban form, consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. And no outstanding issues. Again, deadline is September 28th, so there's one more regular planning commission meeting between now and then, but to have committee of the whole consideration would require an extension from city council. And happy to answer questions if there are any. I know the applicant has some slides and a presentation as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Harden. I think we'll move on to the presentation from the applicant, and then at the end of that, we can ask questions of staff. Now that we have, so I guess, sorry. Worth Mills will present on behalf of the applicant. As a reminder, the applicant and all of those in support have 10 minutes to speak. Mr. Worth, Mr. Mills, if you are ready, you have 10 minutes on the clock.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners. I'm here on behalf of Stanley Martin, a longstanding home builder of over 50 years with their roots in Virginia. They entered the Raleigh market in 2014. Joined also on the line with Brian Ketchum, who is the Director of Land Development. Next slide, please. Can we get that next slide up? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Could you go back one? All right. So this is a quick overview, and Jason hit on a lot of this. But again, this is a rezoning from IX3 to PD district. Neighborhood mixed use would be our base district. We're proposing a maximum 100 residential units, a maximum of 10,000 square feet of non-residential space. Our height on Tract A is a maximum of 5 stories and 55 feet. Tract B, max height of 3 stories and 50 feet. And as Jason alluded to, the 5th floor of any residential building would be limited to stairs, landings, and vestibules. The remainder would be for open air decks for those residents with an upper story unit. And our prohibited uses are vehicle fuel sales, vehicle sales and rental, detention center, jail, prison, and vehicle repair minor. Next slide, please. So here you have 2 photos of the site in its current state. One is zoomed in, one is showing it in the context of the larger community. As you can see, it's located just southeast of downtown Raleigh, with the South Park neighborhood to the north and the east. It is clear cut, practically all impervious surface. This site and the adjacent parcels to the south and to the west have been used for industrial uses for decades. Next slide, please. This is a street view of the southwest corner of the site at Blunt and Branch Streets. It just further illustrates kind of the depressed existing conditions on the site, as well as the lack of sidewalks on Branch and Bragg Streets. Next slide, please. So this site was formerly owned by Greyhound, and Carolina Coach was the local affiliate with Greyhound. This site was used by Carolina Coach for maintenance of its bus fleet. That bus maintenance over the years has caused significant environmental contamination, and it's required extensive remediation. Stanley Martin has worked with Carolina Coach to help remove 24 underground storage tanks. They've removed 20 feet of contaminated soil and replaced with clean soil. And they've removed tanker loads of tainted groundwater that was removed and later treated. Stanley Martin has enrolled this site within the Brownfields program and is working with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to permit residential on the 1st floor of the site. Next slide, please. This is a slide of the existing zoning. You can see the site is currently zoned industrial use, 3-story height limit. That IX zoning district allows everything from overnight lodging, pawn shops, light industrial, light manufacturing, self-storage, and warehouse and distribution. Across Bragg and Person Streets is a large R10 zoning district. That's the South Park neighborhood. We're primarily surrounded by other IX properties to our south and to our west, with some heavier industrial use further down across Hope Street. As you can see, there's clearly a sharp contrast in existing land uses adjacent to the South Park neighborhood. And this proposed rezoning would change the base district from industrial to neighborhood mixed use and create an appropriate land use transition from the South Park neighborhood to the traditionally industrial properties. Next slide, please. This is a map or an aerial of the future land use map. The future land use map recognizes that existing land use contrast and recommends this pocket of space as neighborhood mixed use upon redevelopment. Neighborhood mixed use encourages neighborhood shopping centers and retail districts that serve the immediately surrounding neighborhood. Residential projects are also supported by this designation, generally in the medium density range, which is what we have proposed here. That's typically applies to townhomes and condos with a 4-story height limit. And again, this rezoning with a NX base district is consistent with the future land use map guidance and helps create that land use transition. Next slide, please. This is an aerial of the urban form map. As you can see in blue, we have the commuter rail corridor along that existing railway. In orange, you have transit emphasis corridors along Wilmington Street and MLK Boulevard. You have the transit-oriented district, TOD, on the opposite side of the commuter rail. And then up at the top, you have the southern edge of the downtown core. The urban form map includes this property within its core transit area. Those areas within a core transit area, but also within 150 feet of a moderate density neighborhood, are considered to be general areas. And the general area for a neighborhood mixed use district recommends a max height of 4 stories in the height table in the comprehensive plan. Due to the prohibition that we have on livable space on the 5th story and the 55-foot height maximum, which is between the typical height allowance of a 3-story and a 4-story building. Those are typically 50 feet and 62 feet respectively. This proposed PD is consistent with the urban form map. Next slide, please. This is a aerial of the South Park area plan. As Jason mentioned, this site, along with a few others to our south, have been designated as the focal point of the South Park Small Area Plan. The policy that lays this out in the comp plan encourages commercial, office, and residential uses in the area defined by Person, Bragg, Hammond, and Hope Streets in order to create a neighborhood focal point and economic development opportunity for the South Park area. This rezoning would rehabilitate a contaminated site and spur future development in this pocket to serve South Park residents. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial of the pending development plans just south of our site, so south of Branch. There are 2 currently that have been either in review or approved by city staff. ASR 28-2020 is outlined in the darker red. That is proposed as a 2-story shopping center. And then ASR 101-2019 is just to the southeast of that site in red. And that's a change of use from a warehouse to a shopping center. And so we see this area beginning to turn from that industrial to that neighborhood, residential, commercial district that the South Park area plan is encouraging. And our rezoning, one, offers complementary non-residential uses adjacent to these developments. Our commercial space would be located in the southeast corner of our site, so very close to the 2 site plans you see here. And this proposed rezoning would provide more residents to support those retail uses planned just south of us. Next slide, please. This is a map of the Southern Gateway Corridor Study, which was adopted by City Council in early 2017, and it's intended to create an integrated land use and transportation plan for the southern entrance into downtown Raleigh. Although the site is outside of the corridor study area, it is very close to a specific focus area, namely the Cargill focus area. This area represents a long-term opportunity for large-scale, intense redevelopment that hopefully would provide office space at rates less costly than you would find in downtown. Similar to the future land use map, this rezoning would provide a long-term land use buffer from the South Park neighborhood to the ultimately redeveloped Cargill site. Next slide, please. And now to get into some renderings of kind of how the buildings would be laid out. We'll take some closer looks at what's included in the site, but as you can see here, the PD is proposing stacked townhome units oriented north-south with common open space running through the center of the site and private alleyways that residents would access for their rear-loaded parking. The non-residential space, as I mentioned, Track B is at the corner of Branch and Person Street there in the southeast corner. The building placement takes into consideration that Person and Blunt Streets are designated for more trips and higher classifications of streets than Bragg and Branch. And thus the residential is located in the southeastern corner to complement those developments. I've got I can run through a couple more slides and give a 30-second recap and I'll be done if that's all right. So if you could go to the last slide, please. There's the open space. There's the rear alleys. There's some similar developments from Richmond. Next slide. This is that last one was from Blunt Street Commons in Raleigh. And so again, with the removal of pollutants and the shift from industrial uses to residential uses, this rezoning creates a more compatible development and furthers the South Park small area plan goals and is reasonable in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Okay. I would like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners for both staff and the applicant. And right now, sorry, let me.
I've got a question, Commissioner Thomasilla.
Commissioner Mann, yes.
Hey, Mr. Mills, that was a great, excuse me, I'm coming down with something. Mr. Mills, that was a great presentation. It was very thorough and I enjoyed it. What you said was with regards to providing housing stock and it was also spark economic development to a blighted area. So I commend the project for that. And then also providing residents with being able to support the retail use. But has there been any consideration to low to moderate income housing in this blighted area or affordable housing with this project?
So the goal for this project was to create kind of two different markets based on whether you would have a lower story unit or an upper story unit. So the bottom units would be around 1,400 square feet and will be priced in the high 200,000s, and the upper story would be about 2,400 square feet, and those would start in the high 300,000s. We haven't had any discussions with staff on Capital A affordable housing, but we are trying to provide starter homes and homes for people that are either downsizing or looking to buy that first home at a competitive price point. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Mills. I just think it being in this area, specifically the historically blighted area, I think affordable, capital A or little a, whatever we can get to affordable housing, and then being able to provide, like you said, residents with being able to work and live there, a chance to be able to afford to live in that community. So I appreciate your comments and your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Other questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomasilla. And thank you, Commissioner Mann. You took care of one of my questions. I have a few questions, actually. I noted in the staff report for historic resources that it is mentioned that the South Park or the East Raleigh South Park National Register Historic District is adjacent. But it said for impacts, there were none requiring mitigation. I didn't quite know what that meant. It seems to imply that there are impacts, but they don't necessarily require mitigation. What does that mean exactly? And then I might have a follow-up question.
Right, so this is Jason Harden. I can address that. It's standard language that often gets used in the staff report. The specifics were respect to historic analysis. It's not, it's adjacent to the register district. It's not adjacent to any National Register properties or Raleigh historic landmarks. And so that was the extent of the historic analysis feedback. So if there are some issues where it's affecting, proposing to remove or modify a historic property, that's when that would show up as an issue that would require further analysis or potential mitigation. So given that it's simply adjacent to it, there were no issues that required any specific mitigation on the part of this applicant.
Okay, thank you, Jason. So I guess my follow-up comment would be then that even though there may not be any adverse impacts to any individually listed historic properties, it is still a noteworthy area that's listed on the National Register. And I think perhaps there could be some thought into trying to reflect that history in this development. That's not necessarily mitigating an impact. That's just trying to, I guess, be a good neighbor, blend in with what's already there, and just sort of reflect the history of the area. Some of that goes to what Commissioner Mann was saying in terms of maybe trying to have some housing that would be affordable to people who live in that area, but also maybe, incorporating services and resources that would be important to that community or that maybe have been in that community that aren't there anymore. So I'm not necessarily saying it's not in this development, but I'm saying it would be nice to see this development, not just another one of, what this developer may have done, which is attractive and wonderful development, but maybe something that is sensitive to this particular community. For example, I noted, I had a bunch of questions, so I'm just going to keep going. But I had noted that one of the items in the staff report, I think, said that in order to meet City of Raleigh design guidelines, there was a parcel that contained a ministry that was going to need to be redeveloped. I think it was the Neighbor to Neighbor Ministries. So I was wondering, first of all, has there been any outreach to that ministry? And, perhaps the ministry could be accommodated in the new development since it's going to be redeveloped as part of this development. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about in terms of blending in with the neighborhood. If you have to displace a ministry and the ministry can be relocated in your mixed-use development, well, that's integrating the history that's already there. I'll stop right there. I had some other questions, but I think that's enough for right now. Thanks. I would like to know about outreach to the ministry that's being potentially displaced, if I read that correctly.
So, Ms. Bennett, I don't know how much conversations we've had with the ministry. This rezoning would not be displacing the ministry. This has been either vacant land or used for bus maintenance for quite some time. And I'll just note, as far as responding to the needs of the community, when we were going before the Central CAC in the fall and early winter of 2019, we had a lot of residents, implore us, please, create some level of non-residential space on this site. When we originally set out, this was primarily designed as an all residential development. And so, after, conversations with, community leaders in the South Park neighborhood and in the Central CAC, we decided that, it's in our best interest and in the community's best interest to put some of that small neighborhood retail at the corner of Person and Branch Street. One that complements, the forthcoming developments just to our south, but also, serve some benefit both to our residents and to our community. And I think that's reflected in our CAC vote, where we had 16 yes votes and 0 no votes. And so I think the community has definitely been involved throughout the life of this project, and they have given it their blessing. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner Fox?
Question for staff. Is this parcel within or proximate to one of the 2 cultural districts in the comp plan?
Yes, hello. I'm checking that.
Yeah, give us a minute to look that up.
And then I guess a question for the applicant. Has the applicant considered additional definition around materials or some other way of defining how this might fit in with the character of the neighborhood?
So we don't have any material conditions in our PD narrative. On the slide deck that I had, and this is the part that we kind of skipped over, but there are similar developments that Stanley Martin has completed, one of which is in Raleigh, and it's across from the Krispy Kreme over on Peace Street, the Blunt Street Commons. I don't know if we can go back to the slides or not, or I can just describe it, but it's a mix of row houses, flat roofs, and then pitched roof carriage houses. And those are, brick buildings, high quality building materials. It looks like the slides are coming back up. Yep, so that's a picture of Blunt Street Commons, where we got a mix of building materials, a mix of different housing styles. And if you go back one slide, this is in Richmond, Virginia, just kind of outside their downtown core and near the James River. This is called Riverwalk at Rockets Landing. This is a different iteration of, their townhouse model, where this is, all flat roofs with the open airspace. But again, here you see, a mix of building materials, primarily brick, stone, masonry. And so, while they're not listed in the PD, given Stanley Martin's reputation and previous projects, I fully anticipate them to build, a high quality development that blends in well with the existing neighborhood, both, South Park and, what's forthcoming to our south.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fox. Commissioner McIntosh?
Thank you. I guess this is for the applicant. The proposal looks like it'd be a nice development. I'm concerned with the disparity in the price point between the planned units and the adjacent existing residential neighborhood. It doesn't seem like it's likely that people currently in the neighborhood are going to be able to afford units in this new development. And combined with that, I'm wondering about, the massing model we saw. We have alleys oriented north-south that presumably are going to be the access points for the housing. So the housing is going to be facing inward toward those alleys, which are going to be kind of the sunny spaces between the buildings. And there were a couple of exceptions built into the plan that were going to allow larger expanses of blank wall and larger expanses of space without openings and windows than is normally allowed by the UDO. And when I look at that massing model, I start to assume that those blank walls are going to be on the perimeter of the block. And so I'm wondering, as I'm looking at this plan currently, it looks like the housing is going to be turning its back to the existing neighborhood. And I'm not feeling comfortable with the idea of putting in housing that's 2 to 3 times the cost, 4 times the cost of adjacent housing that also is not engaging the existing neighborhood. I don't think that's in line with the vision of the comprehensive plan. I would hope that this new housing would be put in a way that allows new residents to be neighbors to the existing community in a way where they actually can meet each other rather than having a blank back wall facing the existing housing. I guess that's just my concern. And is that accurate or am I totally off base?
So I can elaborate on that. And so just the short answer is no, they will not be turning their backs on the existing neighborhood. If we could go to the 12th slide in the slide deck, I can illustrate how we anticipate the buildings to be oriented and how people will access them. That's the slide. So if you look at the buildings along Person Street, the front of those buildings would be facing Person Street. And those residents would then come off of Branch Street and access their so all these garages are on the rear end of the unit. So the row of buildings facing Person Street, the front of those units are looking across Person Street to South Park. As you go to the left, those units are facing the open space area in the center of the site, and they're, it's the shared alleyway, and those are also rear loaded. And you kind of flip it for Blunt Street. So the buildings closest to Blunt Street are facing Blunt Street. The buildings second in are facing the open space area. So you've got 2 rows of buildings on the edges that face out. The 2 rows of buildings on the interior face into the open space. And then residents use their rear loaded garages for parking from there. And, part of the transparency and the blank wall area, that is, again, some of these new townhomes that you see, they're very modern, and they have a lot of, floor to ceiling glass windows. And that, I don't think that's, at all what Stanley Martin wants to build here. I think they want to maintain some level of privacy for their residents. And as far as the build to goes, we wanted to reduce the build to on Bragg and Branch simply because of the way that we're orienting the buildings north-south. We modified the build to for South Blunt Street and South Person Street because that helps break up the buildings and helps create a more residential feel for the site rather than having just 70% of your frontage lined with buildings. By reducing it, we're able to break up the massing, make it feel more compatible with the South Park neighborhood, and again, become a part of the community.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McIntosh. Any other questions or comments, requests?
This is Jason Harden. I want to answer the previous question about the cultural district. So those are described in the comprehensive plan, but the plan itself does not provide boundaries. But yes, the answer is there is a South Park cultural district which envisions celebrating the distinct tradition and culture of the area. This is clearly in the general area. I would note on a more specific level, there is a call-out route for a South Park Heritage Walk, which is designed to take you past many of the significant points of interest and historical land. The route does come down along Person and then goes along the north side of this site on Bragg Street. It is part of that overall sense of creating and reflecting a cultural district here.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Commissioner Fox?
It sounds like there are a couple outstanding issues that I'm hearing from other commissioners relating to affordable housing and speaking to the cultural context of the development. I know our standard practice is to refer these items to committee of the whole. We have, I guess, an option to refer it to committee of the whole or hold it to our next meeting. And if I'm not mistaken, both of those would require an extension, probably a minimum of 60 days to meet all the requirements. I can make a motion of which, if I get a sense of what is the preference of the rest of the commission.
One point of clarity is that if we were to hold it at the table, you know, there would be time to add conditions, additional amendments, and hear it at the next meeting, just for clarity.
And sorry, this is Worth Mills. I had Brian Ketchum message me and ask if he could make a brief comment. I believe he's on the line and would just need to be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for giving me a minute or two to speak here. I just wanted to address, we went back to the CAC multiple times. I know it's not a valid point really anymore, but obviously the questions reflected a lot of what you folks are asking, and I appreciate your concern. And we had extensive conversations. Stanley Martin, as a builder, is working in other parts of Raleigh to do affordable housing. So we're very familiar with that need and with the requirements to do so. Unfortunately, on this site, the biggest problem here was the cost of the mitigation. Removing 24 underground storage tanks. This site was heavily contaminated and was beginning to leach into the roadways and stuff into neighboring neighborhoods. So it seemed more important that this site be cleaned up correctly and protect the groundwater in the area than to be able to push the price down to affordable housing level. But in an effort to try to make it as consistent as possible with the surrounding neighborhood, that's the reason this product was chosen, is the lower units are of a smaller size and will be priced, they start under $300,000. And currently the 80% AMI price in Wake County, that Raleigh qualifies for an 80% AMI buyer, is just at $250,000. So we're really within a stone's throw. I mean, I'm not conceding that it is affordable, but we're within a stone's throw, that 80% AMI price, with a very new product type and on a unique and expensive site. So the CAC felt that we had made a sufficient effort to apply a product type to this site that met their needs as far as affordability goes. You guys are familiar with this neighborhood as I am. We've done a lot of market research. Our lower units will be in the upper 2s. Our higher units are in the upper 3s, and that's kind of on purpose. Because if you notice, the houses that are being torn down and rebuilt in the area are all selling in the 4s, low to mid upper 4s. And our goal was to come in below these with both of our products so that we do offer a diverse option for folks that don't want to spend $700,000 on a townhouse to live in Raleigh, can't afford a single family home, and are looking for that second tier below that. I concede it's not technically affordable housing, but we hope that it is attainable for folks in this neighborhood. And just real quick about the cultural, I know there was a plan originally to save the buildings in the South Park plan where they wanted to save and reuse the buildings. It just was not possible. We didn't take the buildings down, the prior owner, Carolina Coach, did, but it was really impossible to get to the contaminated soil and tanks and to do the mitigation and leave the buildings there. So when we were at the CAC, we talked about ways to try to honor the history a little, perhaps a mural on the retail space or a marker or something we could do. We worked extensively with Corey Branch and the CAC on the location where the retail is, the orientation of the greenway, the accessibility of the green space to the neighbors, pedestrian pathway from east to west to allow people to walk through the neighborhood. So a lot of things we've done, I think, are not seen in a presentation like this and at your first look. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood what efforts we've gone to try to accommodate the things that you guys are mentioning. And I appreciate the questions, and we'll continue to work to be a good neighbor. That's our goal. It's been our goal since we came down there and started working with the CAC. And I just kind of wanted to throw that stuff out there for you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioner Winters?
Thank you. This, echoing what my fellow commissioners have said, this has been a wonderful presentation. It's a beautiful project. But I just also want to go pretty much on the record in saying I am a child of South Park, born and raised back in the 70s. Don't ask me what year, that's none of your business. But I understand, so understanding this project, it's a wonderful project. And I'm really appreciative of how the length to clean up in terms of the tainted soil and water, because it is nothing but grace that I don't have asthma, having lived in that environment. And I think that's something to note, various communities being exposed to environmental challenges that can have adverse effects on health later in life. So just a note to that for us as we move forward. So the other part of this is that I also want to say is, well, again, this is a beautiful project, and I understand in terms of affordability. I'm torn, because when we're also talking about aging in place for seniors, I'm also concerned about aging in place for communities who have existed in that community for a while, and the displacement that may happen. Granted, this part is fine, or the ability to age within the new structure somehow, some way. Just what that means for this particular community, again, which is with its historic significance, and looking at other ways. And also, let me just say, appreciating the work that you've done with the CAC and Councilman Branch and the Greenways, but also maybe looking at spaces to mark the space beyond the mural in terms of the significance of it being one of the last remaining historically Black communities that still remain in Raleigh. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Winters. Commissioner Hicks.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback on that. First, by saying this does look to be a really beautiful project in an area that is challenging, due to the environmental contamination. I would like to see more specificity addressing the cultural context, and specifically, this can be done through architectural and landscape details. And I think that also this would directly relate to the transparency as well, having more specificity about how you plan to provide the transparency and what it could look like. I think there's a lot of architectural and landscape tools that can help make this feel contextual and not necessarily be all glass. And so I would be looking for some more information on what the intent is there. I'm also a little bit curious what the average AMI is for this area. That would be useful information. I do commend that, 80% AMI, there's lots of working people that want to be downtown, that need to be downtown to be close to work, that absolutely can't find housing. So that, I think, does address that. But the immediate context, I would be interested to know what that AMI looks like, and maybe have some more dialogue about that. I think those are my two comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hicks. Commissioner Lampman?
As we talk about conditions for the applicant to consider before coming back to the next committee, I'm just trying to put some guidance in here. I think that speaking with some of the cultural community in the area to understand what that transition should look like, what kind of, to Commissioner Hicks' comments about, some of the landscaping, the architectural design, that sort of thing, but also any other ways to integrate within the community and provide that type of kind of honor to that history. I know I'm new to Raleigh, but this is quite an area where I think there's that history that has the potential of being lost and also not celebrated. So if there's some guidance in talking to certain community groups, I don't know all those groups, maybe someone else does, but that might provide some guidance for the applicant and to who to talk to and how to get creatively thinking about some of those things.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Lampman. Are there any other questions or requests? We've heard, you know, obviously a handful of both praises, but also kind of hopes and possibly some additions to enhance the integration of this project to the existing community. It sounds like there won't be a vote today, so I'm trying to get a feeling for if we hold it at the table, if, you know, they've obviously done an extensive amount of outreach already. The applicant seems open to, bless you, seems open to additional conversations. You know, I'm thinking about our trajectory, our schedule. I would, if commissioners would be amenable to this, I would ask that a lot of the commissioners that spoke today and the representative from Stanley Martin, who explained a lot of their past, are, if they're able to connect in the next few days around ways to hone this. I think a very direct and detailed way to hone this could be great. It sounds like they've, I guess I just want to provide direction. And so I'm thinking that maybe holding it at the table and allowing for some enhanced conditions, I guess I'm not sure it's conditions or changes to the PD, by working with fellow commissioners and staff to effectively add some enhancements, if that's something that I'm hearing would work, or you know, I think everyone had some very specific questions about this that do seem like they can be addressed. But let me know if anyone thinks otherwise.
So Matt, this is Worth Mills, and just to recap what we've heard. So I think the commission would like to see more specificity on building materials that will be used and maybe architectural stylings in general, and ways that we can incorporate that architecture or public art to acknowledge the African American community that is adjacent to us. Are those kind of the key points there, as far as?
It sounds like it, and I guess I would encourage you, Mr. Mills, to maybe reach out to a few commissioners in particular to get to just have a conversation on maybe some clarity and particulars. I did see Commissioner Hicks had another question or comment.
Pardon, thank you. I just wanted to add, I think addressing the transparency, no minimum transparency on the ground floor level, that's very concerning to me. So I think to specifically address that. Thank you.
And I think I had a similar question around that. I think that obviously it's marketable to have windows, and you need it for life safety. And I think some of the transparency, just clarifying maybe how it relates to apartment building style or other similar building types, could help provide a little bit more enhanced expectations. Because it does sound like it could be, even though I think I know that it can't be a blank wall, it kind of sounds like it could be. Commissioner Winters.
Also, back to Commissioner Hicks' question of what is the AMI for that area? Getting that answer.
Sorry, could you repeat that once more? You just broke up.
I apologize. To Commissioner Hicks' question, getting the AMI of that area, specifically the immediate south part, what is the AMI for that community?
We can get from the census the median income for the census tract.
Okay.
The A in AMI stands for area, and that's a regional figure. But we can benchmark the median income in this census tract against what the AMI is for the Raleigh metro region.
Okay.
I think that will answer your question.
And when you say, I'm sorry, the census tract, are we talking about it would have to be the former census because before all of the development started, true?
Well, we can get the income is tracked through the American Community Survey, so it's no longer a question that only appears on the 10-year census update. And of course, the most recent 10-year census was in 2009. So we can provide some historical background on that. And if we could also aggregate a couple of census tracts together, because I believe that the census tract boundary just kind of clips this, or the site is on the edge of a census tract boundary. So we could also provide two census tracts that encompass sort of the area between South Lenore Street or East Lenore Street and the Walnut Creek.
Okay, thank you, because I think getting a historical context is also important than just, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So it sounds like, yeah, you have an idea of what we're looking for, Mr. Mills, and staff is also going to be working on some information. And so does anyone want to make a motion following this up?
Actually, this is Travis. Matt, you can say without objection, you're going to defer it for a couple of weeks if you want to.
Okay, great. Thank you. Without objection, we will defer this for a few weeks to the next meeting where the applicant is able to make some adjustments.
I think you also need to, this is David, you also need to include in that 60-day extension request from council.
Oh, okay. I guess I thought at the beginning that the next meeting fell within the timeline.
That's correct. It does fall within that timeline. It does not require an extension if the commission acted at the next meeting.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to the applicant and thanks to our fellow commissioners for the conversation, and we will hear that at the next meeting. Moving on to case Z 1520. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.4 acres of land from residential 6 with the special residential parking overlay district to residential 10 conditional use. The parking overlay district would be retained. This request was last discussed on the August 25th meeting and was deferred to allow the applicant to consider new conditions. The applicant has offered revised conditions to limit impervious area, additional open space, and limit site access. Staff will provide an abbreviated presentation that focuses on these revisions. I would ask that the discussion focus on these revisions to the conditions. We have heard public comment previously, and if the commission would like to hear additional comment from the applicant or public, we would need to vote to allow additional time. There's one person who has signed up to speak. With that, I do plan to reopen this to give a little bit of time for both sides to speak, following up the revised conditions. So I guess with that, we will hear from staff briefly on the updated conditions. Sorry, I'm turned around a little bit in our script. Okay, so John and Anagnos will present on behalf of the city.
Good morning. This is Z-15-20, and we can move to the next slide, please. One more slide, please. All right, so just to jog everyone's memory about the location of this site, it is south of Western Boulevard, in between Jones Franklin Road and Powell Drive, and directly in between Grove Avenue and Carolina Avenue on the south side of an unbuilt but dedicated public street called Barstow Drive. Next slide, please. So here you can see it a little bit closer. Currently has 2 buildings, 1 single family and 1 apartment, otherwise mostly wooded. Next slide, please. Here you can see the street view. Notably in the top right, you can see a open stream channel there on the south side of the site. Next slide, please. And here's the topography for reference. And we can go ahead to the zoning condition slide. Oh, here we are. And so you can see the first 3 conditions here were present the last time you saw this case. And then the last 3 conditions have been added since you saw this on August the 25th. And so that was in response to a conversation about how stormwater would be managed on the site. And so you can see impervious cover of the site is limited to 50%, and that's of the total site area. I do want to make a note that condition number 5 requires 20% open space, but that is 20% of the net site area. So that is less any right-of-way that's dedicated. So if there's a new internal street to serve a development here, that would not be included in the site area for calculation of that 20%. And then the final new condition stipulates that access to the site will only be from Barstow Drive. So that wording can be a little bit tricky there, but the condition is that there would not be access to the site from Carolina Avenue or Grove Avenue, but only from the, at this time, unconstructed Barstow Drive on the north side of the site. Next slide, please. And so the difference between the current development entitlement and the proposed zoning entitlement, this is with a cottage court development assumed. I do want to note that the 19 versus 32 units you see there in the middle of that table, if it was a conventional development, would be 14 units and 24 units existing versus proposed. Next slide, please. And I do want to just make a note that if you do take action on this case, you will need to make mention of an automatically triggered future land use map amendment for the east side of the site to moderate density residential, if that is an action for approval. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. So moving forward, if there is a desire for additional time, which I believe there is, without objection, I would like to allow 6 minutes for the applicant and 6 minutes for the individual signed up to speak. Seeing none, we will move forward with 6 minutes for each side. We will start with the applicant, Mr. Mills.
Good morning again. Glad to be back. So Worth Mills here with Long Partners on behalf of Grove Developers. We've got an updated presentation. If you could throw that up on the screen. Thank you very much. If you go to the second slide. So these are the updated conditions. Just want to give you a recap. So again, we have limited our impervious surface to 50% of the site. We have set aside a minimum 20% of the site for open space. We have limited all of our vehicular access off of Barstow Drive, and we have increased the principal building setback from 30 feet to 60 feet for that adjacent property that fronts along Grove Avenue. Next slide, please. And this updated concept plan kind of shows one, the amount of just natural preserved open space that we anticipate on this site, as well as a general layout of the townhome lots themselves. The sketch plan has been based on many months of conversations between the developer, Dwayne Williams, and the city planning department. As you can see in that dark green, we have a stream that runs across the site's southern boundary and creates a natural buffer for those properties adjacent to our south. As is required by the UDO, there's a 50-foot riparian buffer on either side of that stream. I'll also note that all of these units are rear loaded with access off of Barstow Drive. And so what that does is it creates uninterrupted sidewalks along Carolina Avenue and Grove Avenue for pedestrians to use and to feel safe using, and that they won't have to worry about getting hit by a car backing up or anything else that would flow from somebody's townhome. And just to reference this again, as part of the construction of the townhomes, the developer would have to build out what are called complete streets on its side of Carolina Avenue, Grove Avenue, and Barstow Drive. And what that entails is curb and gutter, 6-foot sidewalks, street trees. So the streetscape of Carolina Avenue, Grove are going to be greatly enhanced by this development. And the city is having Barstow Drive built out, either half of the allowable or half of the required right-of-way width or 22 feet, whichever is greater. So Barstow Drive would be fully accessible upon construction of this site. I'm going to let Mr. Williams use the remainder of this time to talk about the development generally and his conversations with neighbors. But if you have any questions for us, we'll be happy to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. This is Dwayne Williams, and I just wanted to make sure we gave you a concept plan that was based upon a year's worth of conversation with the city. We are not trying to overbuild the site. We are trying to build something that we think would be an enhancement to the Grove and Carolina Avenue. We got a lot of large trees. If you've been by the site, if you pulled it up on iMaps, this is a heavily wooded site. And so we would work to not only keep the tree line that's in the dark green and the light green, but as much of the vegetation on the property as possible. We also like that we're providing street sidewalks in a neighborhood where there aren't any on 3 roads, including Barstow, which we are building at our cost. The fact that we have our traffic flow coming and going down Barstow to stop signs and crosswalks, I think is also an enhancement to the neighborhood. So you've seen some projects like this around town, all of you have, but we like this fact that we're not going to be cutting driveways onto Carolina and Grove Avenue. There's lots of residential single family being done up the street, and there's a lot of small lots being cut in. We also feel like we're trying to stay within a price point that will be affordable. And so these are the things that we have put forth. We're available for your comments and questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. All right. So it says that there's 1 member of the public signed up to speak, but I see 3 on the agenda. Ray, do you have a confirmation if there's 1 or 3?
I still have Kevin Varnell as the applicant.
Ray, we can't hear you.
So I have Kevin Varnell as the applicant signed up to speak. And 2 signups. I have 3 people on the list, but I think only 2 of them are here in the opposition.
So we are moving on to I mean, they have 1 minute left if Mr. Varnell does want to speak, but it was my thought that we were moving on to those signed up to speak.
Yeah, I have Jody Robinson and Maria Diaby.
Okay, great. Then can we move on and start with that?
Yep.
So we welcome Ms. D'Amelio, first up, and each individual has 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, thanks again. I wrote everyone an email, and I'm just kind of going to summarize that in this. The city's push for rezoning of the lots in the Avent West neighborhood is going to lead to a regentrification of it, pushing out the marginalized population in our community. I used to have a neighbor, Kelly, that lived in a duplex on Grove Avenue with her 2 autistic sons. The duplex she lived in was sold, torn down, and on that spot now stands 4 $400,000 single-family houses. She was forced to move to the Kmart that's over, not the Kmart, but an apartment complex near the Kmart, where she has neighbors above her, below her, as well as beside her, with no yard for her kids to play in. And I'm sure you know how loud individuals with autism can be, thus making them much more susceptible to being evicted out of their homes. This happened to them with the lot remaining zoned as R6. The neighborhood is already experiencing tear downs of existing houses under the R6 designation. By changing it to R10, it will mean that more dislocated, marginalized populations on a much larger scale. The neighborhood already has access to a multitude of bus routes. The BRT is not bringing anything here that it doesn't already enjoy. This is why there are a good amount of group homes, special needs populations, and Section 8 houses in our neighborhood. If we allow the rezoning to go to R10, then these marginalized groups will be pushed out of their homes and refilled with NC State students. Are the proposed townhouses geared to low-income housing? It was put forth to the community that the plan was for $500,000 townhomes. In the prior meeting, I mentioned a developmentally disabled gentleman that lives 2 doors down from me. I spoke with his landlord the other day, and he told me that he plans on rezoning his property to R10, which, if allowed to go through, would displace my neighbor also. I thought I had 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. If we do have other questions for you, we'll make sure that you stay on the line so that they can be answered.
I thought I had 3 minutes.
Every individual has 2 minutes per our bylaws. If a fellow commissioner wanted to add a minute, then we can. Okay, then let's just go without objection. We can add a minute to Ms. D'Amelio's comments.
Thank you. Thank you. The end of Carolina Avenue has Section 8 housing, and while I don't like the condition that these townhouses are in, I also don't want the children that live there being displaced. They live in a relatively safe neighborhood amongst caring neighbors that provide support to them if needed. I can't see how allowing these lots to be rezoned would be in the public's best interest. And I'm speaking on behalf of the individuals that have no voice in these matters. They are not homeowners. They have no recourse. Most don't own computers and are not capable of participating in a regular town hall type meeting, much less attending a virtual meeting. That's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Comments. So now we have also on the line for 2 minutes to speak is Ms. Robinson.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to register my opposition to the rezoning, as I feel that the requested zoning will detract from the character of the neighborhood. The neighborhood currently consists of mostly single-family homes and duplexes with relatively large green areas and woodlands. Additionally, this specific lot includes an ephemeral stream and supports a wide variety of wildlife and vegetation. And I feel like this level of density will displace and or destroy the beautiful and diverse population of plants and animals in this area. Thank you, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I would now like to allow for questions or comments from commissioners. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any right now. I think that, I was not here at the last meeting, but do know that there was a conversation last week as well. I also know that a handful of considerations were made. I also fully hear Ms. D'Amelio's concerns about displacement. From a commission standpoint, we have to consider the context of our rezonings, but we also are somewhat bound to the constraints of the site as well. I will continue to think that we are going to continually see this where, people who do not own their property are going to continue to be forced in different directions that they do not want to move. And I do really think that this continues. It's just going to continue to be exacerbated. I think across the city. I'm not sure how how having single family homes displaced versus multifamily displaced, how we make those decisions. It sounds like it's happening regardless over here. It does seem like this is adding more than would be here if it were to be redeveloped for single family housing. So I think that the way that I'm trying to view a lot of these is if we say no, what are we saying yes to? And what could go here versus what are we approving? And with the context that there are some issues that we all really, really want to address and are going to continue to try and address, but don't necessarily have the ability to control from the seats that we're in right now. So with that, does anybody have any other kind of questions or comments? These are obviously issues that have to be addressed that are much bigger than anyone's rezoning. It does sound like there's a tremendous amount of pressure on this part of town. It doesn't have any curb and gutter. It doesn't have any sidewalks. It was obviously developed in an inexpensive kind of edge way when it did. It does sound like the ability to add basic pedestrian accommodations here is a huge benefit for this community. But at what cost? So is anybody ready or willing to make any sort of motion or have a conversation beyond any of that right now? Commissioner Lampman.
I have two things, but one first, Travis, I had emailed about traffic and water. It's not relevant to this. I have a follow-up on this topic, but I want to make sure that those issues are addressed as well.
Yes, ma'am. I believe we have Jason Myers on the line today that could answer your traffic concerns.
Thank you.
This is Jason Myers. I remember seeing that email from you, Commissioner McIntosh, but off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly what the question was. I knew I the answer to the topic. Can you remind us what that question was?
I watched five. I know that we're supposed to keep them separate, but these are back-to-back zonings. I did watch the council discussion on 510, and I think that there's concerns about traffic and water in this area, and I think that Councilmember Fort had requested a traffic study and a water study for this area. So I just want to make sure that, or just know if there's any updates to that discussion.
Sure. I don't recall there being a request for a traffic study. There was, I think, a request for some information about what the trip generation and what the traffic situation is in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I think that part of the answer to the question is how many trips would this site generate under this zoning compared to the current state, compared to previous, compared to other zoning. I'm sorry, compared to development under the current zoning. If it were developed under R6, we would project about 14 trips in the AM peak, 19 trips in the PM peak, and 179 trips daily based on the number of single-family residential units. With the rezoning to R10, two things change. One is the number of units. The other is the type of units. And in the national data, townhouses tend to have fewer trips per unit compared to single-family residential houses. There's a lot of potential reasons for that. They're probably smaller units. They may have fewer people in them. There may be other effects too. So that the proportional increase in the number of units does not yield the same proportional increase in the number of projected trips. So that goes up to 24 and 32 for a change of 10 and 13 in the AM and PM peak, and a change of 123 additional trips daily. Of course, that is very much projection. There's huge error bars on that sort of data, and it is in many ways very false to project to the single digit on those things. So it does increase trips a little bit, but at the same time, it also, development of this site under any sort of subdivision, whether in R6 or R10, would require Barstow Drive to be constructed, which would help connect the neighborhoods together and provide, I guess, more flexibility in routing choices. If I remember correctly, Carolina does not have a full movement access to Western, and Grove does, and I may have that flipped up on my head. One of them does not.
Yeah, you have that flipped.
I apologize for that. And Barstow Drive would allow easier, more direct access to that full movement access. One of the things that some folks from the public have stated about traffic patterns in this neighborhood, which makes perfect sense to me, is that the next full movement drive down, and keep the name of this correctly as I'm looking at my map, is at Powell Drive, and so people will take Powell Drive, turn left off of Western Boulevard, and then use Linville Drive, which is a public street that is very narrow. It's a very narrow right of way to access Grove and potentially Carolina Avenue or Scarlet Maple Drive further south. This would allow people to take a left at Carolina and take less of their trip through the neighborhood. I can't predict whether people will actually do that, but building out a section of Barstow will help allow those choices to be made differently. And I believe that in the future, Barstow Drive will be able to be connected all the way between Powell and Carolina. That right of way exists if there's subdivisions on any of that land, or if the city park property that fronts on Barstow Drive is developed under administrative site review, there'll have to be construction of that portion of Barstow as well. But we're talking about the one block between Carolina and Grove, and that additional connectivity will provide some benefits, especially to resiliency, and provide, I guess, more trip choices if there were a crash on Western Boulevard, or if people would want to avoid taking left turns. Does that answer your question?
That's fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate it. And what about water? I know that's not you, Jason. Travis?
I don't believe that we have stormwater staff with us.
That's correct. Unfortunately, stormwater staff had to drop off the call.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't. There was a memo, I think, in the earlier agenda, but all it looked at was whether or not the site was large enough in terms of its percentage of a drainage area for it to require the site to address a known downstream structural flooding issue. Answer to that question was no. That doesn't mean that conditions couldn't be proffered regarding stormwater detention, but the UDO would not require anything special here in spite of a known downstream flooding, because it's under 5% of the drainage area that contributes to that issue.
My last question, thanks Matt for letting me ask all my questions. I just have a clarification question regarding our voting status. Abstaining is a yes, correct?
That's correct. Counts as a yes vote.
Thank you. I just want to say that I really do like this development. I like the townhomes. I do plan to abstain on this particular vote, knowing that it is a yes. But also I do want consideration brought to this area and others, but as a kind of a sticking point to say we need to be looking at what this means and what the conversations will be like for the city as we look at developing out, affordable housing. When we're looking at, again, these local AMI groups of people who are actually living there, is very different. So that's just my thoughts. I thought a lot about this case, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Leitman. Any other questions, comments? Commissioner York? I'm sorry, Mr. York?
I don't get to vote, no. But just to explain, there is no abstention. You cannot voice your vote, but it will be registered as a yes if you don't voice your vote. So it would not go down in the minutes as an abstention. It would still be treated as a yes vote. You're only excused from voting if you have a readily ascertainable financial interest in the subject. And so you don't have to say yes, but if you sit quiet, it will be registered as a yes. If you say you abstain, I'll have to ask you to vote. Just wanted to clarify that. There isn't an option to abstain. And since we're doing roll call vote, you have to log a yes or a no.
What is just to ask, and so this is a really the basic question, if it's 5-2 against and 1, isn't it 1 abstain? Isn't that how that's typically, how is that? Is it just the 2? It's just 4 and against? Okay, thanks. I think then at that point, Shanitha, I don't know how we need to document the minutes, but I think that there needs to be, I'd like to just voice that I think that there's concerns about the gentrification. It's not just this one, the prior case as well. So I just would like that to be documented. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, Commissioner Layman. Any other Commissioner Hicks?
Thank you. That was going to be one of my comments. I just wanted to note that in the 2 cases that we've talked about today, they've both had equity issues in housing. And for the record, I'd like that to show in the minutes that I also have concerns about that. And we need some tools for addressing that. Obviously, this isn't the place to do it with this case because we don't have the tools. I also just wanted to note that, to me, the applicant has worked. I wanted to commend them for working with the commission's comments. They've addressed our questions. They've made an effort to reach out to neighbors, which was an important ask that we had. And while recognizing that the gentrification that's occurring is problematic. I also just wanted to point out in terms of some of the stormwater, one of the conditions was a maximum impervious of 50%, which is actually slightly more stringent than R6, which is what the original zoning is. And so I think that I just wanted to point that out. I feel like that's very useful. And one last comment, I'm not expecting a change in the conditions. It slipped by me at the last meeting, but the condition to slope the roof and do it at a pitch of 4 and 12, I just wanted to point out that, in my opinion, a 2-story building with a 4 and 12 roof pitch will really look like it's a flat building. It's a very low pitch, and so I would encourage them to build a structure with something that maybe is a little more contextual and a higher pitch, and maybe keep our eye on that for future projects. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Fox?
I'd like to make a multi-part motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to approve Z 1520, acknowledging some of the issues that have been articulated by other commission members. I still do believe that this is reasonable and in the public interest and consistent with many policies in the comprehensive plan related to compact development, capitalizing on transit access, coordinating transit and land use. Also, by offering a glimpse at the concept plan, they have shown that some of their design choices do make this a little bit more contextual in terms of some of the design. Another part of that motion, this would also result in a future land use map amendment to the parcel at 600 Grove Avenue from low density residential to moderate density residential. And then finally, the last part of my motion, I would like to refer to strategic planning. Some of these issues that we've discussed related to what I'll call incremental issues of affordability as we see creep. So each individual rezoning case is not affecting affordability in an area, but when you think about them on an aggregate, they are. So incremental issues related to affordability and stormwater and flooding concerns.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Fox. Commissioner Hicks?
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Seeing no other comments, I would like to ask Chinitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. And I do want to thank Commissioner Fox for the thorough, thoughtful motion.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Nay. Excuse me, nay.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Chair Thomas-Lowe?
Aye.
Commissioner Winters?
Nay.
All right, thank you, everyone. The motion passes 7-2. We will be following up with strategic planning on the discussion noted. Moving on to case number Z2420. This is a request to rezone approximately 11 acres of land from residential 4 to residential 10 conditional use. This request was placed on the consent agenda at the August 25th meeting, but has not been discussed yet. Staff will provide a presentation and then we will hear from the applicant and the public. John Anagnost will now provide an overview from staff.
Good morning. This is case Z-24-20, a request to rezone from residential 4 to residential 10 with conditions at 6125 Buffalo Road. The next slide, please. And so this site is technically on the north side of Buffalo Road as the road travels from New Hope Road to 540. And you can see here the surrounding area is largely residential with zoning, existing zoning residential 4 with manufactured housing zoning to the west and south. There is a little bit of mixed use zoning that starts towards the 540 interchange. And on the next slide, we'll see where that is. So as I mentioned, this site is in between North New Hope Road and 540 on Buffalo Road. You can see on the right side of this image to the east, the Neuse River crossing underneath Buffalo Road just before it reaches 540. And then you can see, again, the residential character of the area. And at the bottom of the image, the Buffalo Road Athletic Complex, which is a City of Raleigh park. Next slide, please. A little bit closer view of the site shows that it is mostly cleared of trees, grass along Buffalo Road. There is some tree cover in the northwest corner, as well as an existing single-family house. Next slide, please. These are the views from Buffalo Road. So the top left is looking west or south, depending on how you think of it. And again, you can see just a mostly grassy 10 acres there with some trees in the rear. Next slide. There are 2 zoning conditions offered for this case. So one of them sets a very small number of allowed principal uses. And so those are single unit living, 2 unit living, otherwise being referred to as a duplex usually, and then multi-unit living, which would capture apartments and townhouses. And then the second condition prohibits the apartment building type. So really the multi-unit living you see in the first condition would really only be allowed in a townhouse building type. Next slide, please. So here you can see the comparison of the entitlement of the existing zoning and the proposed zoning. There's an error here on the right side. So that density figure should read just under 9 units per acre. I believe it's 9.97 units per acre. And so the unit count there is correct. 42 units allowed under the current zoning. 105 units would be allowed if the proposed zoning is approved. And you can see the setbacks do get a bit smaller in the residential 10 district. Next slide, please. The future land use map here is moderate density residential. And so this area is a bit of a transition from a lower density residential area towards the east, and then a little bit higher density residential towards the west as you approach New Hope Road. Next slide, please. There's no urban form in this area. This site is actually outside of the city limits currently, so during a development plan, they would have to submit a petition for annexation, and so this is moving towards the eastern edge of Raleigh city limits. The request is consistent with the future land use map recommendation of moderate density residential, which envisions density between 6 and 14 units per acre. This request asking for 10 units per acre. Next slide, please. And then there are consistent policies that support development of areas of the city that have existing infrastructure and that would allow more housing supply. Next slide. There are a few inconsistent policies that have to do with the fact that this request would allow the townhouse building type and slightly higher density, both of which are not present currently in the immediately surrounding area, and so that would be a bit of a departure from the existing character of the area. Next slide. And your deadline to make a recommendation is November the 23rd. I can take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Anagnos. We will actually move forward to the applicant, and we'll just ask that we hold all questions until all people have spoken to our fellow commissioners. Jamie Schwedler is representing the applicant and has 10 minutes to present. Ms. Schwedler, if you are ready and on the line, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Tomasulo. This is Jamie Schwedler at Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street. I am the land use attorney for this rezoning. We also have Laura Good and Amber Fairley. Laura's with my office and Amber is our site planner. Both of them will be available for questions, but I'm just handling the presentation. Next slide, please. As John noted, we are requesting to rezone this about 10 acres on the west side of Buffalo Road from R4 and manufactured housing to R10 CU for a pretty straightforward townhome development. The area is surrounded, and John showed some slides, by significant residential development, the Stone Ridge neighborhood to the north, River Landing and Abington Place neighborhoods to the east across Buffalo Road, and those are just north of the athletic center, and then Hunts Mobile Park to the south and west. There was one slide where John showed kind of an overview that had closer to the Neuse River as open space, but that site is actually entitled for a townhome development at site plan. So there is other types of development going forward in the area. And I think generally the existing pattern is single family. Some of the newer development is going toward more denser infill townhome development like this one. Next slide, please. And as staff noted, this request is consistent with the future land use map designation of moderate density residential, which does allow townhomes in the multifamily dwellings and contemplates density between 6 and 14 units per acre. So at R10, we're not only one of the districts that's contemplated by this designation, but our density is squarely in the center of that range that's contemplated by the future land use map. The zoning today, R4, is actually at a lower density than that range would otherwise indicate. Next slide, please. Our conditions here are rather simple and straightforward, but are in response to concerns that we heard at the initial neighborhood meeting, which was, whether apartment types, if they were to be allowed, would cause an increase in traffic, would cause lighting issues, and would be inconsistent with the surrounding product that's in the area and planned just close to the Neuse River, as I mentioned. And so we added that condition to remove apartments as a permitted building type to align just with the plan of what we're proposing to do, which is the townhome development. We also had questions associated with traffic in general along Buffalo Road that was discussed at both meetings. And as the staff report notes, this rezoning does not trigger a TIA at this stage. And that is because the increase in traffic generated is only about half of the threshold that the city requires in order to have a TIA. So the rezoning would be at the maximum increase 47 morning trips and 62 PM peak trips, as opposed to the current land use. Buffalo Road is slated to be a 4-lane divided road, but the timing for the widening has not been determined, and it's not on the city's current plan. So that is a plan for the future. It is something that we'll have to address at site plan, including any dedication of right-of-way and improvements such as sidewalks, but is not part of the review at this point because the TIA is not included. Next slide, please. And as staff notes, the request is consistent with numerous comp plan policies because it will expand existing housing choices in an area that's already served by other public infrastructure and in a compact manner on what is essentially an infill site surrounded by, as you saw, those existing residential uses at a slightly lower density, but again, consistent with the density that's called for in the future land use map and done in a way to attempt to blend into the area that's surrounded there. I'm happy to answer any more questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Schwedler. Seeing that the applicant is complete, we will now move on to either neighbors or those opposed who are signed up to speak. We have 3 individuals. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. And if you are online, you can see that clock ticking down on the video. And I will ask the moderator to introduce each speaker.
All right, it looks like we had a Greg on earlier, and I do not have him anymore. I'll start with Amber Fairley.
And I'm just a witness with the applicant team, site planning, here to answer any questions for you.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's no problem.
I have Brad Conti.
Hi, thank you. I am just want to voice my opinion. I'm a 20-year resident of River Landing subdivision, and we're directly across from this 10 acres. And I just wanted to kind of lead with and close with, I know there was a mention about a traffic study and how it doesn't meet the clips, but I think that's a little narrow-minded because if you look at Buffalo Road, especially on those pictures, you can barely pick out Buffalo Road, and hopefully everybody's noticing all those homes that are around there. And it has really evolved in the 20 years from a country road to a spoke from 540 to hosting Buffalo Athletic Park, which hosts Olympics and a pool and access to the Greenway. They've just opened a Lidl grocery store. And my recommendation is that a traffic study be performed on Buffalo Road. As it sits right now, you can barely get in and are out of our subdivision. There's a blind curve. There's been actually a school bus 2 years ago came around that curve and crashed into this 10 acres. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. And as mentioned, as you're approaching towards 540, there's two other pieces of land. One's a 17 acre and one's over 50 acres. And so my fear is without a traffic study on an already existing, overstretched Buffalo Road, anything else is really going to be, turn something that's already dangerous into something that's extremely dangerous. So that's my call, is to just consider a traffic study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Ray, just to confirm, Mr. Conte was the only person who was here with us?
Yeah, he's the only one that I have on the line.
Okay, great. Well, then I will bring it back to the table. Want to hear from fellow commissioners, any comments or requests or questions for either staff or the applicant. Commissioner Lampman.
This is also kind of similar. I know we're supposed to look at these individually. However, I believe that this is one of now 4 proposed mass developments in the area. I have requested on the prior Buffalo Road case that we have an analysis done on what proposed traffic will be with all of the developments. So now that this one's up, I'd like this one to be included in that as well. Buffalo Road is a 2-lane road with a turn lane. I don't believe that the current infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, is here to support that level of new units in this area. So I don't know what the status is on the previous study. I know probably not prepared since this is a new case, but I'd like to know if we defer it, which I assume we will since I think this is the first time we're hearing it. All 4 subdivisions that are planned, I'd like to know total number of units being developed and the impact of trips between what it is right now, when it takes, I believe, an hour to get, or like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it is, to get to Buffalo Road and I-540. So I'd like to kind of know what the impact will be on Buffalo Road with all 4 divisions. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Lampman. Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I want to echo Commissioner Lampman's comments about the traffic. I'm concerned about the number of proposed and planned developments, and the fact that Buffalo is not funded. The widening of Buffalo Road is not currently funded. I'm also concerned about the impact of all of this increased traffic on the 2-lane bridge on Buffalo Road. I didn't pull the bridge report before this meeting. I just thought about it a few minutes ago. But I would imagine that there's a lot of traffic going over this 2-lane bridge. And I would like to know more about the impact on that as well. I know that's an NCDOT thing. I think I'm just concerned that we could potentially be approving all of these developments with no plan for the road to be widened. It's on the books, but there's no plan yet. There's no funding in place for the road to be widened. So if we are going to come back with additional information, what I would like to see is not so much the incremental increase in trips of this development, but I would like to know what the level of service is out there now, what the level of service would be with this development and all the other planned developments. I would like to know the accident data, because I believe we saw some emails about accidents along Buffalo Road. So what's the accident rate out there? How does that compare with the state accident rate? And that would give me a little bit better context to make a decision on this case. But I will say I'm leaning towards, not really being in favor of any of these developments as long as I know that there's no plan to widen Buffalo Road. I know that's outside of the control of the applicant and even the city, since it's an NCDOT road, but I just feel like I would feel irresponsible to continue to put more traffic out there, given the current conditions, without a plan in place and a timeline in place for Buffalo Road to be widened and the bridge to be addressed if it needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. Any other questions, comments, requests for staff or the applicant? Commissioner Lampman?
Sorry, I just have one more overall comment is just because we can doesn't mean we should. So as we look at all of these, just because we can put X number of units doesn't necessarily mean that we should. And that I think we need to be looking at, you know, what the definition of R6 versus R10. I get that if it's an R4 right now and it goes to R6, what's the difference of 2 units? But that could mean a big difference. So I just want to kind of make that overall point because that's also being part of the discussion. They wouldn't be here trying to get an R6 if they can just develop it anyway as an R4. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Fox?
Be interested.
We can't hear you.
Ray, did you unmute me?
There you go.
It was really profound. You installed it. I'd be interested in deferring this till our next meetings so we could get more information as requested by Commissioner Bennett related to traffic, accident rate, and level of service.
This is Travis. If I could ask a clarifying question, I heard a request to defer for a few weeks. Staff needs to make sure that we understand the request for information that is to come back. I heard a lot of questions about existing traffic patterns in the area given recent approvals, and is your request to have staff just bring back what I'll call raw numbers, or do you want a more nuanced traffic report? If it's the latter, then what I might suggest is that you ask for the applicant to produce some additional information for us.
I do want to make sure, Commissioner O'Haver has had his hand up a few times. I want to make sure that he had a chance to speak.
Thanks, Matt. And maybe we can take this offline. I just want to understand and support Commissioner Lampman and Commissioner Bennett's request, just so I can wrap my head around that. Is the intent to cause DOT to make improvements? Is the intent to maybe come back and add conditions per case so that we can improve those conditions as they go? I'm curious what the objective. I agree with it totally. Just want to make sure I understand what the objective is.
Commissioner Bennett.
Well, I know we can't influence NCDOT. Their funding is their funding, and their TIP is their TIP. I think my objective is to examine the case in context. I think my objective is to show that, for example, if it's a level of service F out there now, and we are approving additional trips, I mean, it can only get worse. I mean, F is the worst, but it can only get worse from there. And there's no plan in place for NCDOT to improve the road. I think it's to allow context for if, for example, I vote nay, or we all vote nay, it's not an indictment of the development. It's saying we as a commission would like to see the necessary infrastructure in place before we approve these developments. I think that's all I'm trying to say. I don't want to just approve a development because it's a nice development if the infrastructure is not there, whether it's the road, it's transit, it's sidewalk. I just want to make sure that we're looking at things holistically and not just approving a rezoning because it's a nice development.
Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Bennett. I did have I had a technical question for either Mr. Bowers or Mr. Crane. This is not in city limits. It does have city zoning. It's in the ETJ, I guess. Under the current zoning, would they automatically be incorporated if they were to build at R4?
This is Travis. So it depends on what the developer would like to do with the site. If they wanted to develop at existing zoning and take advantage of R4 sized lots, then it's very likely they would need to petition the city for annexation so that then they could gain service in the city and be incorporated into the city. The same is true for R10 zoning. So it would be my interpretation that if this rezoning were approved, the applicant would want to petition the city for annexation. And I want to circle back around really quick while I have my mic open and just discuss a bit the questions raised and the concern raised by Commissioner Bennett. Again, I want to make sure that I understand and am correctly interpreting your statement here. It sounds like what you're asking for is more detailed traffic information in the area provides a little bit more context based on recent approvals and what this rezoning would, the impact of this rezoning that it would have on the surrounding traffic patterns. If I've interpreted that correctly, then what you're asking is a traffic impact analysis for staff to review. And I wanted to confirm that without making any assumptions.
Yes, that's what I'm asking for.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Commissioner Lampman.
Just a follow-up question to that. If we request a traffic study from the applicant, is it appropriate to ask them to include the 3 other developments that are out there? Because the one that's still on deck has not yet been approved. So I'm just confused about, I think that that's an important component to this analysis as well, to have, A, B, C, these, no development, with all development, and, with only approved development, whatever that looks like. But that's not, the problem is that the other Buffalo case is not their case. So I don't know how that would be addressed.
Okay, so I feel like we're starting to go in a little bit of a circle. I have had a request from the applicant to ask a question, so I did want to open it up for Ms. Schredler to ask that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it got clarified during the course of that discussion, but I would like to just note that if the request is a TIA and now this is a concern over 4 other cases, has that same request been made on the 4 other cases as well? Because this is a relatively, I don't know the other, or maybe if Matt or our planner could provide us the other cases, just to see how the scope is impacted with this case versus the other cases. Generally what happens at site plan is that your experts on staff will analyze our impact on the area and make a determination as to what improvements should be made. So it's not as if these rezonings go through without a TIA and traffic is never visited again, or that there's no mechanism to make improvements. It's just whether we're going to do it at this stage or at the site plan stage. And so I just want to make sure, I know we have callers on the line that ask about, whether these take into background traffic. If we're starting to go in that direction, we would absolutely want to know, to work with the traffic staff to see what other recommendations they're making on other cases, as it would only be appropriate to do something that's proportional to our density and use, not something that we're solving the problem for all of these other cases.
Okay, thank you. Looks like Commissioner Bennett maybe has a follow-up.
Thank you. So to be clear, here's what I'm asking for, and perhaps it's not something from the applicant, perhaps it's a larger something. What I am asking for is a traffic study, impact analysis report that shows the level of service on Buffalo Road with all of these proposed developments. I'd like to see what the level of service is now. I would like to see what the level of service is with all of these proposed developments. And we can use that objectively when we're looking at all of these rezonings that come before us, because it's not just this one, it's all of them. And so even though this one may only add a couple cars, if the level of service out there is already F, those couple of cars are a significant addition to a bad situation. So what I'm asking for is, I guess, a comprehensive traffic impact analysis of Buffalo Road with all of the proposed developments.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I do know that Commissioner Fox had made a kind of soft proposal to hold it at the table. I also, taking a little bit of a step back on this, we have heard a handful of projects in this area. And I think a lot of where we will start to be able to have more like richer conversations around a lot of these, whether it was the last project or this project, is that how are we, like, every new development is going to be in areas that have been overlooked for the past 20 years. It seems, I mean, just squinting my eyes, high level, almost every rezoning. And I think that we're looking for more comprehensive guidance, leadership, and vision for how we are growing. I also, I think a lot of this, the idea of understanding the actual data behind our needs as a community, our aspirations as a community, and the reality as a community is also very critical. And so things like the level of service, things like where we have acreage that can be buildable. I also have to pull back to a little bit of what we're actually tasked to do with some of the rezonings. And I personally have a little bit of trouble kind of holding a project back to standards that aren't being held, or that every other project in the area isn't being held to, and without notification. And so that's also something that I question I have for staff. Is there a way to say, hey, this isn't adequate, this is obviously a hot zone area for infill development? It's hard. I look at it and there's two huge subdivisions that were completely clear cut 20 years ago. And they all have one means of access on Buffalo Road. And so they have very, very poor circulation and connectivity. And I can't help but think that, okay, if they were connected better 20 years ago, then there'd be a way for some of this traffic and safety, to be, or the traffic could be dispersed and safety could be heightened. We're somewhat catching up and trying to correct a lot of planning errors and issues and omissions from our past. And I guess I just ask for us to think both how this meets our comprehensive plan, and I fully support what Commissioner Bennett and Commissioner Lampin have said. I do also have, just broader questions about how we as a body can or should not move forward on particular cases when we haven't treated other cases similarly. And I'm definitely open to feedback or thoughts. Commissioner Bennett?
I think one thing we could do is pull together a meeting of our transportation committee, and we could address issues like this. I haven't been on the commission very long, but I know just since I have been here, I have seen several cases like this where the public has said, there's a traffic problem here. We're concerned about traffic, but the staff report says, well, this doesn't trigger a TIA. What does that mean to the public? They don't understand always what that means. And really, it doesn't mean anything. If they're saying there's a traffic issue, we need to understand the traffic issue. Having done transportation planning for the last 25 years, I understand these numbers. So that's why I ask some of the questions that I ask. And when I see some of this, I know the questions to ask. The public doesn't always know the questions to ask. So perhaps we could have more in-depth discussions about these traffic issues, along with maybe some just general education for us and the public about what some of these terms mean. So when they say there is a traffic issue on Buffalo Road, we don't appear disrespectful when we say the data doesn't show that there's an issue on Buffalo Road. You know, we need to understand from their viewpoint, what are they saying is the issue? They need to understand from the technical viewpoint when we say it doesn't trigger a TIA. And maybe we develop some sort of standard that we do on all of the reports. Maybe a TIA isn't triggered, but maybe there's a higher level than what is being provided to the public. But whatever we decide to do, I think maybe that's just another reason why getting the committees together to discuss some of these issues in more detail, to get more guidance, more education, might be helpful.
Absolutely, and thank you for the follow-up. Yeah, it is. We're just kind of, committees should be starting any bit now, just kind of waiting for finalization from some staff, I think, for coordination of hosting and figuring out some of the back-end administrative issues. But as far as I know, I'll follow up with Travis after this, but the hope is that that the other two committees start ASAP.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, I'm trying to, so want to move forward on this case, or just move forward to the next case. And so we obviously have questions. Commissioner O'Haver, is this adding to?
Sorry, yes, Matt. I just wanted to, before you kind of wrap this one up and move on to the next case, again, understanding the concerns and looking at the transportation issues. We hear a lot about stormwater. I believe Commissioner Miller, about a month ago, raised the same question of how do we not try to piecemeal solutions and really look at this stuff comprehensively. I totally agree with that, and it's needed. I guess my only question is, how long is this process going to take for this specific applicant, and what is it going to do to the timeline on this project versus the other projects, et cetera? Totally supporting the need to do it. I just want to make sure if this is what we're going to do, that we hope committees start ASAP, but we have people who are going through a rezoning who are relying on this information and for us to make decisions. So maybe we don't need to talk about it here so that we can keep moving, but I'd like to understand what the timeline impacts are for this project as well as others as we start to move in this direction.
I agree with that, Commissioner O'Haver, because I do also want to respect the time and of both neighbors and of applicants, and respect their desire for both feedback from the city as well as information from the city and us. So I think with that, I'm gonna without any objection, I'm gonna hold this at the table so that we can have a conversation kind of immediately following this up with staff, and hopefully some of my fellow commissioners, we can touch base in talking with staff to understand levels of information and data that we can get, both more immediate versus more longer term, and how to perhaps think about this in kind of a balanced way to move forward, fully understanding that we all can make motions and vote however we wish, but trying to think about, what that first step towards thinking about this more holistically is, and to see if there's any ways that we can incorporate that with this by the next meeting. If no one has any objections with that, then I'm just going to go ahead and hold this at the table.
I think that That's fine. I think from the staff perspective, I just want to clarify a little bit. If we're not asking the applicant to perform a TIA, typically the staff would not do the same level of detail that would be in a TIA because we don't know the level of service at a lot of these intersections because they're not counted as part of any sort of regular program. So in a TIA, you typically have to go out and count those intersections, and staff does not normally do that absent some more major study for a corridor. We can compile existing numbers such as the average annual daily traffic numbers that, and there is a counting location not far from the site on Buffalo Road that goes back. Historically, we can look at what the trends in traffic have been on Buffalo Road. We can do some sort of high level analysis. We can put crash data together, but we're not going to come back with something that's as detailed as a TIA. Is that going to meet the spirit of the information that's been requested?
From my interpretation, it sounds like a TIA honestly is not as helpful as, say, some of the more rounded information that you're talking about that are what people are experiencing on the ground versus just kind of number crunch statistics. And so Commissioner Bennett is by far the expert on this, so I certainly yield to her. But it sounds like that would, I think personally, would help me really start to understand the story of this area, like the transit story of this area that perhaps backs up and supports some of what or all of what pretty much all the neighbors are saying, and could also help maybe a dialogue or understanding as to what and how things could be mitigated moving forward. And I also wonder, Travis, would you be able to tell me what the timeline is for this again?
Are you asking for the case or for more information?
Sorry, for the case.
Sure thing. Give us 1 second.
I think it was November 28th.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've got plenty of time. I just want to confirm that for you.
So if we were to hold it at the table, and it takes an extra meeting or two, we have that space, correct?
That's right. So it's November 23rd.
Okay. Then I guess notwithstanding any other holdups, we will, or notwithstanding any
objections.
Sorry, yeah. Notwithstanding any objections, then we will hold this case at the table and move forward. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next case. Thank you, everybody. So, moving on to case number Z2520. This is a request to rezone approximately 5 acres of land from commercial mixed use 3 stories, parking limited conditional use, to commercial mixed use 5 stories, urban limited conditional use. The property is partially within the Swift Creek Watershed Protection Overlay District. This item was included on the consent agenda at the August 25th meeting, but not discussed. Staff will provide a presentation, as will the applicant. Ms. Reckhow will present on behalf of the city.
Good morning. So this is a rezoning request Z2520 on Olympia Drive, just under 5 acres requested to be rezoned from CX3 PLCU to CX5 ULCU. And then there is a small portion of the site, south of the site, that has a Swift Creek Watershed Protection Overlay District that would remain in the request. So general area, this is south of downtown near the intersection of Tryon Road and South Wilmington Street. This is a commercial area. As you get a little farther south, there's some light industrial uses along South Wilmington Street. To the west and northwest is Renaissance Park planned development in a larger residential area. And to the southwest, you can see is Garner's jurisdiction. So the next slide is a close-up of the site. You can see the parcel is bounded by Olympia Drive to the north, where an office building currently exists, Grinnell Street to the west, Tryon Road to the south, and then you can see an area of reported tree conservation area on that frontage, and some frontage on South Wilmington Street. The next slide shows some images of those frontages. You can see the building and surface parking, as well as the tree conservation area. Next slide. So there are 3 conditions proposed. These shrink the build-to range under the urban limited frontage from 0 to 20 feet to 10 to 20 feet from the right-of-way. They also specify lighting fixtures would be pointed away from residential uses on the site and prohibit some uses that are normally permitted in commercial mixed use. When looking at the current versus proposed zoning, the base district remain the same. The request would increase the maximum height by 2 additional stories, and there's a change from a parking limited to an urban limited frontage. So under the requested district, there would be no parking permitted between the building and the street, and the request would also remove the current conditions in place of those proposed conditions. The current conditions do prohibit residential uses, so there's an increase in residential time entitlement. And the current conditions also cap total development, so total entitlement for other uses would increase as well. The request is consistent with the future land use map designation of community mixed use. The next slide shows the urban form designations. There are several that apply to this site as a result from the planned bus rapid transit service in the area. The planning for that is ongoing, so the exact alignment has not been identified, but the request, all these designations would recommend an urban or a hybrid frontage, and the request does include that with the urban limited frontage. So it is consistent with the urban form map. Overall, the request is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan, including the 2 policy maps I just mentioned. There are a variety of consistent policies identified. These include one from the Southern Gateway area-specific guidance, which would see a variety of uses permitted in the Renaissance Park Hub area. And no inconsistent policies were identified. And that is the end of the staff presentation. Your deadline for action is November 23rd. And please let me know if I can answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Rakow. We'll now move to the applicant. David Brown will now present on behalf of the applicant. The applicant has a total of 10 minutes to provide a presentation. So Ray, if Mr. Brown is on the line, then he can go ahead and start.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. This is David Brown. I'm a landscape architect and landscape with right now. I have a few brief comments to make. Hannah did an excellent job summarizing the case. Would like to point out that the property was last rezoned in 2004, and a lot has changed in Raleigh since then. We have a new comprehensive plan, and we also have a new unified development ordinance. Our client, the Young Group, represented by Bob Young, Russell Marks, and Vernetta Alston, recognize this site as being very valuable to expanding the goals of that comprehensive plan. As Hannah mentioned, it is located within a transit-oriented district. It's located on a transit emphasis corridor. There's an urban thoroughfare on Olympia to the north and core transit area status. One of the things that we see about this area of Raleigh is that surprisingly there are very few apartments in this area. There are townhomes and single family a third to a half mile to the west, but very little housing actually in the core transit area boundary. One of the key items about this case is changing the current zoning conditions to allow residential use while retaining the Swift Creek Watershed Protection Overlay District. When we look at the aerial photo of this site, you can see that there is a tremendous amount of development work that was implemented in the mid-2000s There's infrastructure located there, both on the ground and under the ground. There's a shared stormwater facility across Grinnell Street. So the site is what we kind of call ready to move forward. But I think due to the previous zoning case conditions, it is sat vacant. What we would ask today is your consideration of this case, please. We think it brings a lot of benefits to the public. We think it's very reasonable. Hannah's done a good job citing its consistency with the comprehensive plan. I might stop for a moment and see if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We're actually gonna kind of wait until you finish up, unless that was the end of your presentation.
I do have a couple of other small points we can make. This site is strategically located near access to both Wilmington and Tryon Roads. Those are major 6-lane avenues by designation. I believe it is well served by what we would call a functioning grid. The proposal in front of you would allow for the construction of apartments. That is certainly our client's intent, is to build apartments here. We've had our 2 meetings with neighbors and stakeholders. And just also want to point out that in a previous development request, the tree conservation was established. Stormwater is in place. And with that, I'll wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Brown. So there's no one else signed up to speak in favor or against this. We did receive I think, one, sorry. I misread the zoning case, but I didn't see really any other emails or anything. Do any planning commissioners have any comments or requests for either staff or the applicant? Commissioner Fox.
Question for the applicant, if they have this history, the rezoning from 2004, do we know why housing was restricted at that time?
Mr. Brown, you are free to answer that.
Okay. Commissioner Fox, I don't know the genesis of that. I do know that even in our current meetings with nearby neighbors, there is certainly an interest in this site providing some support services, a coffee house, that type of amenity. The zoning that we're putting out, the request doesn't prohibit service retail. I do want to be candid. Our intent is to provide that. But I think that's where the prohibition on housing came from.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner O'Haver.
Yeah, another question for the applicant. David, you said you had neighborhood meetings. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? How many did you have? And seeing that there has been no one to sign up to speak out in opposition, were there concerns that you heard through those neighborhood meetings? Could you elaborate on that just a little bit more?
Yes, I will. We had our first neighbor notice meeting. Nobody came to our party. We had 0 attendance, hurt our feelings. At our second meeting, we did have some good response. We had 10 visitors. We had some good dialogue back and forth. There was concerns about parking, even though I believe we are a good third of a mile from the Renaissance Park neighborhood. Would there be any spillover? We believe the site is already blessed with an abundance of parking and the ability to share the parking among the various land uses. The previously mentioned request to, can we provide some retail amenities like a coffee house or a beer garden? Questions about traffic, from what I recall, which of course will be answered usually at time of a site plan or subdivision request. I have been listening to the discussion this morning. I think that kind of summarizes what we heard.
Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other questions or requests? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion. Commissioner Fox. Commissioner Fox?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve Z2520 as it is reasonable and in the public interest and consistent with numerous comprehensive plan policies related to capitalizing on transit access, complementary land uses and urban vitality, zoning for housing, and also area planning policies from the Southern Gateway Area Plan.
Commissioner O'Haver, okay.
I'll second.
All right, so there is a motion and a second. We will now ask Janitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Chair Tomasulo?
Aye.
Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everybody. The motion passes 9-0. Moving on is our final case for today. It is new business, and it is case number Z4819. This is a request to rezone approximately 15 acres of land from commercial mixed use 3 stories, parking limited conditional use, to office mixed use 20 stories, urban limited conditional use. Ms. Ellis will present on behalf of city staff.
Good morning, everyone. This is Sarah Ellis with the case planner for Z4819. It's a request to rezone just under 4 acres from commercial mixed use 3 with a parking limited frontage and conditions to office mixed use 20 with an urban limited frontage and conditions. This case went before the Midtown CAC as it was submitted sort of during that time period, and they recommended approval in a vote of 48-4. The Planning Commission deadline for action is November 9th, 2020. General overview of the site. It's located at the intersection of Wake Forest Drive and St. Albans Drive. There's a variety of commercial and office uses around it at variable heights. As you continue further out from the main arterial roads, it transitions into more residential uses. And ready for the next slide, thank you. Just a couple views looking into the site from the 2 corners where it touches the public right-of-way. You can see that it's a primarily forested site as it is present, and this is a view looking in northwest from the corner of St. Albans and Wake Forest Drive, and then this number 2 is looking in from Benson Drive as you head further west into the site. The proposed conditions, this is slide 1 of 2. Residential is prohibited. There are limited uses on the ground floor of the parking structure that are all listed out here. There are square footage caps on the amount of retail and office uses permitted on the site, and the building height for all permitted uses would be limited to 15 stories or 250 feet. Trash collection will only be serviced from the parking structure, and generally the parking is required to be in a structured garage. And this is the last slide of the conditions. So the parking structure square footage is limited, as well as the access points to the parking structure are limited to either an internal access point off of St. Albans Drive or located off of Benson Drive. That's that small drive on the western portion of the site. And the facade materials are specified, as well as stucco or EIFS being prohibited. And finally, the applicant has offered a condition to limit the peak stormwater rate to the 50-year storm event. The existing versus proposed zoning would make a significant change by no longer permitting residential. So that again is because of the zoning condition prohibiting residential on the site. The urban limited frontage would change the minimum setbacks, and it would reduce them from a minimum of about 10 feet in the majority of the front. It would retain that same 20-foot setback on the back, but it would allow for either a 0 or a 20-foot setback on the front of the property, front and side. And the largest changes that you are seeing is that would allow for a significant increase in the amount of office that is allowed on the site, as well as an increase in the amount of retail permitted on the site. The request is consistent with the office and residential mixed use designation on the site, as you can see here. It is also consistent with the urban limited frontage is consistent with 2 designations on the site. It's in a city growth center, as well as located along 2 transit emphasis corridors, both on Lake Forest and St. Albans Drive. This slide is just to make you aware that there is a current there's a small area plan that is currently under review. I do want to emphasize this is under review and it is not an approved document at this time. However, there's guidance that there's guidance that is being considered right now, the Midtown St. Albans Small Area Plan. A piece of guidance that we wanted to call to your attention is currently St. Albans Drive has a 2-lane designation, a street plan designation, where you see the blue dotted line that I've placed right below the red square that is outlining the site. The Midtown St. Albans plan has a recommendation that that segment of the street be widened to a 4-lane divided road. However, that has not yet been approved, and this is still under consideration. And the same, there's a recommendation that Benson Drive be extended, where you can see that it currently has a gap. There's a property under separate ownership from the rezoning site that Benson Drive would be continued to should that be completed. But again, these 2 pieces of guidance are both not approved yet, and they are still under review. The request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, as well as the urban form map guidance on the site. The consistent policies relate to compact development, corridor development, pedestrian-friendly development, architectural features, and frontage. And generally speaking, this is because this is increasing the density on the site. The urban limited frontage provided for pedestrian-friendly accessibility to the site in an area that will be well served by public transit. And the frontage request is also consistent, as that it is consistent with the urban form guidance in the area, and the same thing for the building orientation policy as well. The inconsistent policies are housing variety, as this request would not permit any housing due to the zoning condition provided, as well as zoning for housing. And the level of service is also inconsistent because the site underwent a traffic impact analysis that determined that the level of service at St. Albans and Wake Forest Road may be below E. I will also note that because of this determination from the traffic impact analysis, this may limit the build out of the site at the time of site plan review unless a traffic mitigation plan is provided. There are no outstanding issues, and the deadline for action is November 9th, 2020, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Ellis. We will now hear from the applicant, Amanda Bambrick. She will present on behalf of the applicant. And as a reminder, the applicant and all of those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
So, hey, this is Amanda. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I'm going to zip through these slides, knowing that we've got the time limit and y'all have had a busy morning. But Amanda Bambrick, Morningstar Law Group. I want y'all to know that I also have Mike Daniels here with the Coastal Federal Credit Union, who owns the property. I have Rick Baker and Cliff Lawson, who are engineers with Timmons, and I have Eric Brunk and some other folks here from Ratio Architects to answer questions as well. So I'm just going to jump right in. The first couple of slides here that you can look through, and if y'all want to jump ahead a slide or two. As you know, the Coastal Federal Credit Unions here in Raleigh, they've been here since 1992. They have grown pretty tremendously over the years. This site, can you go ahead a slide, maybe 2 slides? Yeah. So here they are, they have acquired this adjacent property to their existing site. They're at the intersection of Wake Forest and St. Albans. Can you jump ahead, please? So as you can see, it's the site's immediately adjacent to their existing facility. And the idea here is to create a really sort of long-term, very nice, very stable use, kind of create a campus atmosphere, retain ownership of the parcels, kind of moving into the future, really establishing Coastal here as a long-term tenant. Can you go to the next one, please? I'm not going to dwell here. We wanted to show you what the general site looks like. Obviously, we're subject in all aspects to the site plan process, which y'all completely know. And I'm going to leave any specific questions to the architects. But as you can see, it's a parking garage and an office tower. You can see in the back there is a stream and some wetland area. All of that obviously is buffered and preserved. The intent is for it to be a very green, very pretty site at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So where I really want to focus in is the extensive collaboration and sort of the timeline that we've had at this point. At the very beginning of this, we knew that there were residential neighbors in the area, and at the very outset, even going through a couple of sketch plans, we knew that the neighbors were going to be very important. We wanted their feedback and hopefully ultimately their support. So we started, our first neighbor meeting was in July of 2019. At that time, it became very obvious that stormwater was actually the primary concern that folks seemed to have. So we wanted to learn more about that. We also discussed taking stormwater kind of to the city level as well, helping the neighbors and our team kind of form a conversation with the city, who had been involved sort of over time with this process as well. And I'll let Rick get into it more if we need to go there, but basically, due to some existing uses in the area and when they were constructed, some items and some things in the area are subject to heightened city stormwater regulations. Some things that are built out there predate them. So there was a lot of water out there. We needed to really kind of figure out where it was coming from and where it was going and what those impacts were. So our team met with the neighbors, with the City of Raleigh Stormwater team in late July. We did a site walk with the neighbors on the neighbor property shortly thereafter. And then what I want you to note here is sort of the gap between July 29th and the November 15th submission of our actual rezoning application. Given the complexities and given the ongoing conversations, and I spoke at length, he couldn't talk here today, but with Patrick Martin and folks with the Midtown CAC, just really trying to understand where the water was, where it was going, and what we could do, even though Coastal is not responsible for all of it, what we could do to really try to work with the neighbors and figure out some sort of solution. So during that period of time, it was a pretty significant study period where I wasn't really doing a whole lot because the engineers were pulling maps and data and really trying to figure out what we were dealing with. To that end, after we had presented the research, we actually had the neighbors come to the existing Coastal building where we would discuss those findings greater and sort of still wanted to carry the conversation for collaboration. You go to the next slide. In light of that, we had another sketch plan to sort of get more feedback specifically from a stormwater perspective, which we did. We, in the meantime, also met with the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance. That went really well. They were excited about the project. We went back to the city of Raleigh to discuss stormwater with the neighbors because we also know the city has a fund where if there are some sort of repair issues, that there are different priority levels that can go towards different properties. All that said, the big buildup, and obviously the timing got a little strange, but we went to the Midtown CAC in January. We met with the neighbors again at the Coastal building, trying to talk through some of our ideas and what we expected kind of from a budgetary perspective there. We went to the Midtown CAC for our vote. We were extremely pleased with the result. It had been sort of the result of a very long process of discussion with a handful of neighbors as well as the CAC chair. And even though our property was not in the Atlantic CAC, we opted to go there as well since the property was pretty close to that line. So I worked with Katie Jetton over time as well. It was a little strange because everything was happening at the time, but we still went to the CAC meeting in late February and they ultimately voted to approve it as well. Next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to repeat the conditions. We've grouped them into use, design. Can you go to the next slide? Parking, materials. At the end of the day, this is first-class property. As we mentioned with stormwater, instead of the 2 and 10, we're going to contain it to the 50-year event. That was something that we pulled from the neighbor meetings as well. Next slide. And again, if there are more questions about stormwater as we get deeper into this discussion, I will turn it over to the engineer. Like I said, we're increasing the ordinance requirement as to what we're required to contain. And Coastal is also very actively working with the director of the stormwater department and is committing about $600,000 in additional funding to divert stormwater actually generated by other uses, essentially down St. Albans, and they are contributing an additional $100,000 towards on-site detention. And this was a big result of the discussion that we had with the neighbors. It is ongoing through the design process, so we don't know 100% what it looks like right now. And obviously we have to get to site plan, but I'm proud of this because it really was a result of the conversations that we had and really kind of getting literally on the ground and understanding what the conditions were. Next slide, please. Again, if we come back to stormwater, I'm going to take this slide and defer to Rick, but this is the product of their research, trying to figure out what additional uses are in the vicinity and where the water was coming from and where we could potentially take it. Next slide. This illustrates, and again, we'll have to come back to it for the conversation, but essentially we'll be taking additional stormwater out through the front of the site and directing it down St. Albans. And if we need to, Rick can talk more about that, but that's the reason for the additional cost there. Next slide. In terms of traffic improvements, and again, we can talk about this in a little more detail. I'm trying to preserve the time. I know our engineers have gone back and forth with transportation. They definitely are having those discussions. And again, we know that there will be more of that at the site plan phase. Widening St. Albans to add a second westbound lane, including a bike lane. Benson will be restriped to make it 3 lanes. The driveway off St. Albans is right in, right out only, and coastal employees are directed to enter and exit solely from Benson. Next slide, please. Sort of in conclusion here, I really can't stress this enough, and I mean, this is my approach, I think, across projects, but there has been a considerable amount of time really kind of sitting down and walking with and trying to be a good corporate neighbor as much as we can, given some of the pre-existing site conditions. Coastal put the project on pause for a number of months, trying to make sure it understood those impacts and had a series of ongoing in-person conversations with the most affected neighbors. We got positive written feedback from the Atlantic CAC that we were considerate of our impact, and we really did slow down and try to be thoughtful. And as Sarah noted, I'm not going to go through all the policies and things because she did a great job, but it's fully consistent across the board. So we feel like this is a good project. It's going to be good for the city of Raleigh. Obviously, getting through the rezoning process will launch immediately into site plan, and that's kind of where we are today. We feel like it's an exciting project, and as I said earlier, we're all here to take questions if you have them.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Bambrick. There are 3 members from the public signed up to speak as well, and I am acknowledging that it is noon, but we're pretty far through this, and have these 3 residents signed up to speak. And so if everyone's okay, want to move forward, hear them, hear from the residents, and I do think we can have a thoughtful conversation and at least make a direct move forward on this one way or another after that. So if everyone can hang tight for another 10 to 15 minutes, if you have to step off, I understand, but it'd be great if as many people who can stay on can stay on. So we'll just keep moving and ask Ray to introduce our first speaker.
And before we do that, this is Travis. We've only got 1 person on the line today out of the 3 people that signed up to speak.
Oh, okay. That makes it even easier.
As a correction, I actually have 2.
Okay.
I have Ann Sharon.
Yes. Yes. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Amanda pretty much stole my thunder on my whole speech, but we agree completely that Coastal has done what they need to do. We are the low-density residents closest to the Coastal project, and the stormwater is indeed affecting us. They have been very helpful, and my neighbors and I approve of the plan. And the reason why I wanted to call in and say this is to draw, you'll hear from me again if Benson Drive is ever connected, because that is going to create even more trouble for us. We're losing ground, and homes are potentially going to be flooded. We feel like what Coastal is going to do is going to help slow this down, so that maybe when our number comes up on the drainage assistance program, that our problem will be completely solved. So we appreciate everything Coastal's done and look forward to them being a good neighbor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sharon. And the next resident signed up to speak
is Sam Hershey.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'll be quick since I know it's noon. I'm speaking in favor of this development as a result of a process that should be, with a couple minor tweaks, how the city operates. Early on in the process of meeting with homeowners, including some of whom are directly impacted but outside the notification requirements of the city, it became apparent that a major problem impacting the surrounding area was stormwater runoff due to the persistence of homeowners or from homeowners impacted. And meeting with the Midtown CAC, Coastal and the city understood the importance of taking care of this issue. While some here may dismiss the importance of the CAC, the role that they played, it served as a very valuable role in supporting the homeowners impacted and reinforced the importance of the issue. Coastal deserves a lot of credit for going through the process and working with the city to come up with what we believe is a just solution to the stormwater problem. Coastal did what was necessary to earn the overwhelming support they received from the community for this project. If the city is serious about citizen engagement, this kind of interaction between Coastal, homeowners, the CAC, and the city should serve as a model for how the city operates to ensure homeowners are not run over by development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hershey. Appreciate the comments. And so I guess I didn't know that they were going to be in support, but they were. It seems like this has been a very comprehensive process. It seems like even outside the CACs, it seems like a lot of work has been done with a lot of the residents who are impacted, and that Coastal really is a great neighbor. I do want to open up this to. I do want to open this up for any question or comments, either the applicant or staff, to the Planning Commission. Commissioner Winters.
This is more so a comment. I want to thank Coastal Credit for being such a wonderful neighbor. As former chair of the Raleigh CAC, citizen engagement is very important, and to see that this amount of work was done is wonderful. It's making me hopeful in terms of what citizen engagement will look like in the future, even though the CACs have been dismantled. So I applaud your efforts and say thank you.
Great. Commissioner Bennett.
I just have a question, Chair Tomasulo. Is this part of the Midtown plan that we are discussing in Committee of the Whole?
That's a question for either Mr. Bowers or Mr. Crane.
It's in the study area, and as the presentation noted, there is a proposal in the plan to classify St. Albans as a 4-lane divided roadway, which would have right-of-way implications for a development plan on this site, should that be adopted onto the comp plan.
Okay, so my question is really not a reflection on this development, which sounds like it's been a model process, but is it prudent for us to vote on this before we conclude our discussion on the larger plan, if this is a part of the larger plan?
I think that the issue is whether or not, based on your knowledge of St. Albans plan, that there's anything in that plan that would change your determination in this case. From the standpoint of staff, when we brought it to your attention that it's within the study area, but from the standpoint of our analysis of plan consistency, we don't include plans that are not adopted. So we did not analyze this zoning case against that unadopted plan specifically for consistency. You, of course, can take a look at what's in the plan and decide whether you think it's consistent with the plan recommendations or not. If the plan will not become adopted until you make a recommendation on it, and it goes back to council and the associated comprehensive plan amendments are adopted by city council, which is some time. And I think you need to make a determination as to whether this case should be held for that to occur. And the real issue is your decision going to change when and if that happens? Or is your decision pretty much going to be the same, at which point I think it would be reasonable for you to consider acting on this case even before the adoption of that plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Bennett and Mr. Bowers. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts? Commissioner Fox?
Question for the applicant. The condition to prohibit residential uses, can you talk me through the rationale of that other than what your proposed project is at this time, which may or may not move forward?
Hey, sorry, I was still on mute. I mean, I really think it's, Coastal wanted to put down some conditions to give the neighbors some certainty and to really sort of indicate what the project is and what it isn't. It's, purported to be, a long-term campus community. It's most likely going to be office, and given that location, I mean, it's a pretty, pretty built-up area. So I think it was a function of giving some consistency and clarity there, and just being direct and saying what it is.
Okay, thank you. Is that it looks like Commissioner O'Haver.
So to clarify then, in the future, if there was a need for residential, this site would need to be rezoned again. Is that correct?
Mrs. Travis, that's correct. The property owner would need to go through the text change to zoning conditions process.
But it could go through the text change, which is a less time-consuming process, if I understand that correctly.
It's a different process, but it does have the fingerprints of the rezoning process.
And neighbors are still notified for the text change, the zoning, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. If there's no other conversation, I feel like I would like to make a motion to recommend approval unless there are other commissioners that have questions or comments.
I just have a comment, but you can go ahead and make the motion.
I would like to move to recommend approval of Z4819. The rezoning request is reasonable and in the public interest, and is supported by multiple policies in the comprehensive, including compact development. It's following and consistent with the urban form map. It's creating pedestrian-friendly development. Will provide ancillary retail, providing stormwater above and beyond city requirements. It is compatible with the surrounding area.
Okay, Commissioner Lampman?
Second.
So there is a motion and a second. I will now ask Chanika for a roll call of members for their individual vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox.
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks.
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman.
Aye.
Commissioner Mann.
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver.
Aye.
Chair Tomasulo.
Aye.
Commissioner Winters.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, everyone. The motion passes 9-0. That takes us through all of our discussion items on our agenda. It's 12:13. We just have to move on to approve the minutes. And we have 3 sets of minutes on the agenda. Does anyone have any requested updates to the minutes at all? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion. I will move to approve the minutes for August 11th, 25th, and 27th. Commissioner Lampman?
Second.
With a motion and a second, I will ask Janitha for a roll call of members for the individual votes.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox.
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks.
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman.
Aye.
Commissioner Mann.
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver.
Aye.
Chair Tomasulo.
Aye.
Commissioner Winters.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. The minutes pass 9-0. We'll now move on to a few quick reports. My report, basically all I have is that we do have a special text change committee meeting on September 10th, following up the last text change. So that will be this upcoming Thursday at 4 p.m. And I will also add that I'm hoping to have an update today or tomorrow from staff on committees. Really trying to work towards getting these up. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do. We really want to be meeting, and I think right now it's just a matter of figuring out the time availability and the coordination and production of it. But I am hoping to have that information from staff. Maybe Travis or Ken has have more information on that today. But the goal, I just want to reiterate with everybody that we are very much pushing to make those happen. So thank you for your patience.
This is Travis. Just really quickly, I don't have an update. Really, the only thing that we need to finalize is the membership on the committees. So the chairperson did some great work over the summer break to formulate the structure. There are a few committees that were staffed with 6 commission members, which is problematic. So we'll need to trim it down to 5 or less. But I'll work with the chairperson on that, and we can get the rosters all published online and send out our notices and start making contact with the chairpersons of the various committees to set up the next meetings.
Okay, thank you, Travis. So it was unlawful to have 6 people?
Unlawful is a strong word. I would say it's problematic having a majority of the Planning Commission also populate a subcommittee.
Okay, thank you. Well, then we will work to rectify that immediately. Now on to a report of the members. Does any member have a report?
Chair Tomasulo?
Yes.
I just have a question. For those of us commissioners that would like to attend the special text change committee meeting but aren't on the committee, how can we do that? What's the best process?
What we can do is have, sorry, this is Travis again. We can have staff send out the meeting link to all commissioners, just so you have it. And if you want to attend, you can.
Great, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Winters.
As a follow-up, is it possible that we can have links sent to all committee meetings just as a regular occurrence?
I think that'd be great.
Sure thing. We can absolutely do that.
Thank you.
And I guess I did actually have one more comment. I wanted to sincerely thank Commissioner Hicks for steering the ship 2 weeks ago. It sounds like it went great, and just appreciate that ability to have some time and space with my family. So seeing, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I know everybody is ready to go. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to keep saying it. I think what we saw today is a clear indication of the need for the equity analysis of the comprehensive plan. It's not, I think we're going to continue to have these conversations. I think applicants are going to continue to feel like we're being unfair to them, and that's certainly not the intent. But I think we're all, collectively as a commission, acutely aware of these issues, and we're trying to be responsible in our decision making. We're trying to take a look holistically. We're trying to look at what's going on in the larger area and what has happened in the larger area, and make our decisions based on that. So we are going to continue to ask these questions, and we are going to continue to defer our decisions until such time as A, there is some sort of review of the comprehensive plan to answer those questions for us, and B, we have some sort of guidance so that perhaps would reveal to us in a staff report, just like we have historic resources impact, transportation impact, we can have an equity impact. And if it's there for us to see, then we won't, be asking the applicants these questions that perhaps they can't answer, and perhaps it's not their responsibility to answer. But I do think we need that sooner rather than later, or we're going to continue to be tied up on these cases like that. I'm not sure what the GARE initiative is doing, and if that is actually looking at the comp plan. We're doing a lot more with equity in terms of the organizational structure of the planning department, but we need to key in on prioritizing the review of the comprehensive plan, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bennett. Fully agree. Commissioner Fox.
I just wanted to tag on to Commissioner Bennett's comments. I also agree with that, and I would like to consider not only a review of the comprehensive plan, but a review of policy and procedure process. It's been my observation, and we saw an example of it here today. Many processes are meant to restrict access, which is in itself inherently inequitable. Access is restricted often by the use of vocabulary, by the use of ceremony or procedures. And we find that today, think about when we were reviewing the PD and you could see what was going to happen in that development in Raleigh, right? We could see that versus a case on Durley where we were trying to conceptualize what those conditions were going to yield in terms of built form. And so for me, I just wanted to be on the record and say that is an access issue, that's an equity issue, and I'd like to think about that a little bit further.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Fox. Seeing now, Commissioner Lampman.
I just want to make sure that that gets into the record. I know sometimes I just want to make sure that those comments got in the record. They're important. I think they reflect a lot of us. So thank you for the articulation, Bennett and Fox.
Thank you, everybody. And I think that possibly could parlay into the report from the Deputy Planning Director. Oh.
Yes. Yeah, are we?
Wait, actually, it looks like there was a late draw from Commissioner Winters.
Sorry. And it just reminded me of our request again months ago of the statement to be made. And we were waiting on communications to have that active on our on the Planning Commission website. Just wanted to check the status of that. And if I need to recount, it was the statement Commissioner Bennett made, beautifully and eloquently made, right after we had a pause on our meeting, and we requested that that be made a few times. So I'm asking again to see what the status of that is.
Thank you. We will.
I didn't get an answer.
Yeah. Mr. Bowers or Mr. Crane?
So we did run that by communications. They expressed some concerns with posting the statements of individual members of various boards and commissions on the website. So we got some pushback on that. We can do some additional follow-up and provide you a more complete report at the next meeting. On the comments of Commissioner Bennett, we are, I think, looking at, well, the next time we update the comp plan, making equity a focus. I would say that a comp plan update is a public process that involves a fair amount of outreach and is not going to happen quickly. What I think can happen more quickly, and staff has already started working on this, is can we include an equity section in the staff reports for rezonings? And I think we need to put together a draft methodology for how that would be done. Some of you on the commission may recall that the housing and climate impacts sections of the staff reports are relatively recent ads that was just done within the last couple of years. And, you know, we had to decide how are we going to, based on the information that's typically available at the time of rezoning, how are we going to analyze the impacts? I think that we are actively looking at including an equity section within the staff reports. And when we're ready to share sort of the methodology as to how we feel, what is a defensible way of analyzing those impacts, bring it back to the commission for your input. That's something that can probably happen faster than a large-scale amendment to the comprehensive plan.
So can I ask for a little bit of clarity on that? Because I guess that's different than I guess what my understanding was. I guess two things. One, as a planning commission, can we issue a statement?
I think that you can issue a statement, yes.
Okay, so if we reformulate it so that it makes sense from our perspective as a cohort, then we can go ahead and do that.
Yes.
Okay, and what are the would it be me reaching out to the department along with other commissioners, or would it be communicating with you exactly what it is?
Yeah, I think you know. I believe Commissioner Bennett's remarks were in written form. You would simply take formal action at a meeting and say this is a statement that we would like to endorse through a vote, and then that action could be.
I guess I thought we did that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you have, I will make sure that by the next meeting you have a definitive answer, and perhaps that definitive answer will be that it's up on the website.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I guess we will look for that. I guess September 22nd.
Yes.
Okay. And then I guess the other my understanding that there was already that we were waiting for like an equity analysis that was being done by staff that was charged, I think initiated either by staff or by council, and that we were kind of in a holding pattern to understand what elements of that we could go kind of dive deeper and in more detail on. Do the other commissioners, was that your understanding? Okay, seeing a bunch of nods. Okay. And I guess I thought it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago that there was going to be findings from a much broader, extensive equity report. Is that still in the process, or did we miss it, or?
Your understanding was that we would have a equity audit of the comprehensive plan completed a few weeks ago?
No, that there was, based on, I think, the GARE and other things that were happening when we spoke, when we had the presentation, it was the understanding that I thought something was in the works, and we'd be getting not necessarily a report on the comprehensive plan, but it was an equity audit, I thought, of process and protocol in the city, and in general, like how we operate, and that was going to help us understand how we could, in much more detail, forward with elements of an equity audit of the comprehensive plan in strategic planning committee. Is that, to the other commissioners, does that sound okay?
Okay, so you're saying that what your expectation is some direction as to how strategic planning committee can undertake an equity audit of the comp plan.
And I think that it was that we were. I know I was told that there was something going on internally at the city that we'd be getting a report on that was in addition to just the GARE initiative.
Okay.
And if we have to follow up offline instead of going back and forth, then that's fine. But I do just want to make note that, it seems like all of us here, I saw like 7 heads shaking, that there was this expectation and that we were, that was the understanding. And so maybe it's I don't know if it was a miscommunication or misinterpretation, but it looks like maybe Commissioner O'Haver might have some notes that help.
I'm trying to find them. I'm going back, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to say I don't think it was understanding. I remember us specifically asking the question.
Yeah.
How can we do this? And we were informed at the time that was underway. So I don't think there was a misunderstanding there. I'm trying to find my notes and just having a hard time finding them. But I seem to remember us explicitly requesting that, and the response was that was in the process. So if I can find those, I'll pass them on. But
okay, at this point, I think we're going to put this down to come back to you with some written report at your next meeting.
Okay, and I'll commit to fellow commissioners to kind of follow up with staff offline and try and just understand the path that we've been on and that we'll go on. And please follow up with me directly if you have any specific points of clarification or explicit questions.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think that brings us to an end. I guess, do you have any other elements of your report, Mr. Bowers?
At this point, I believe you have it in your agenda packet, so there's no need for me to read all those dates off.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, again, thank you, everyone, for your time. I appreciate the extra 32 minutes today. We're working on our process and timing, but I really appreciate everyone's comments today and continued diligence on everything. So have a nice rest of your week, and hopefully everyone will receive those links to the special text change soon.
Actually, before you cut off, I can report that it's already on the website. So we post all of our meeting links on the Planning Commission website. So anytime you want to join or watch, you should be able to do so from the Planning Commission website.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Everyone, have a wonderful afternoon. Signing off.
Thanks.
Thank you.